the Admiral of Hogwarts. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction, so don't try any techniques you hear here in real life. Your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 1 Who I Am. One day in June 1991, the sunlight brightly illuminated all the residences and small gardens in front of them in a middle-class neighborhood near Rains Park in London, England. Because it was a Sunday, many people took advantage of the good weather to walk their dogs, trim their lawns, or simply move their deck chairs or cushions to the lawn in front of their homes or in a nearby park to bask in the sun. If you stood at one end of the street and looked down it, you could see that almost every household had someone out enjoying the rare London sunshine. However, not everyone was enjoying the summer sun. For example, in a hospital ward by the window at the end of this neighborhood, a young boy with brown hair and brown eyes, his head wrapped in gauze, was lying diagonally on the hospital bed, frowning as he looked out the window at this middle-class neighborhood in London, England. Next to him seemed to be a palm-sized figure, Granger family, dentist's sister, Hermione Granger. The boy muttered some incoherent words, while his gaze drifted across the neighborhood below. He couldn't believe that he had transmigrated into the magical world of Harry Potter. The boy's current name is Hugo Granger, and he is 11 years old this year, having just graduated from elementary school. His parents are both dentists and own a dental clinic in this neighborhood. Their residence is also here. They are considered highly respected people in this neighborhood. If it were just this information, Hugo would have thought that he had only transmigrated into the body of a British person 30 years ago, but the problem was that when he woke up from the hospital bed yesterday, in addition to seeing his parents in this life, he also saw a somewhat familiar figure. Having watched the 8 Harry Potter movies twice in his previous life, Hugo swore that he could not possibly mistake someone at such close range, and the memories that flooded into his mind afterward confirmed certain things. Perhaps because he had drowned before in this life and his head had hit the cement edge of the artificial lake. His parents immediately called in medical staff to examine him after seeing Hugo wake up and then fall asleep again. After the medical staff confirmed that he was only asleep due to exhaustion, they took their daughter and left the ward, leaving Hugo the space to rest while taking advantage of the night. Hugo confirmed his current situation. In his previous life, he was a doctor. One rainy day, when he was about to go out to see the re-release of the movie Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, he unfortunately encountered a traffic accident. Just as he volunteered to rescue the traffic accident victims being carried onto the sidewalk steps, he was unfortunately sent to this world by another car that couldn't brake in the rain. However, after arriving in this world, because an infant's brain could not support the thoughts of an adult, all the past events from the time he transmigrated until now, 11 years, were hidden deep in his brain. It was not until now, due to a fatal accident, that he awakened the memories of his previous life. Because it is the same person, there is naturally no question of who devours whom. But because the 30 years of memories from his previous life are obviously more than the 11 years of memories in this life, Hugo feels as if he had unfortunately died in his previous life and then suddenly been reborn as an 11-year-old British boy 30 years ago. While also carrying all his memories. However, after receiving these 11 years of memories, Hugo discovered that he might not simply be reborn in a foreign country, but had directly switched to another world. Because in his memories, he has a twin sister named Hermione Granger. If it were just a name, it wouldn't explain anything. After all, there are many people in the world with the same name. But considering that face, which is almost identical to the one in the movies, plus his parents' profession as dentists, Hugo felt that the probability of all these being coincidences was too small. It was obvious that he had come to the world of Harry Potter. The first thing he did after discovering that he had completely come to another world was to worry for a while about his relatives and friends in his previous life. Fortunately, he has a younger brother who can take care of his parents in their old age, and his act of courage will also allow his parents to receive government care. So, after feeling down for a while, he quickly focused his attention on his current situation. After all, some things cannot be changed after they happen, and everything must move forward. In the original story, Hermione Granger is the only child in her family, but considering that he is a transmigrator, this change in identity does not necessarily mean that this is not the world of the original story. As a loyal fan of the Harry Potter series, He knows the magical world very well, and also longs to have the opportunity to come into contact with that wonderful world, especially after he came here. That longing became even stronger, but unfortunately, according to the memories he just received, he has never experienced a magical surge. In other words, he is likely to be a muggle, an ordinary person who cannot master magic. This should actually be a normal situation. After all, his parents in this life are not wizards, so even if they are twin siblings, it is not strange that only one of them is a wizard. Exceptions like the Creevey brothers in the original story are, after all, only a minority of the minority, but this is too cruel for Hugo. To transmigrate to this world, have a female protagonist sister, but not be able to come into contact with the most attractive part of this world is really terrible. Fortunately, he now has the mindset of a part of an adult who can adjust his mentality, so that he does not end up like Harry Potter's Aunt Petunia, turning from jealousy to hatred towards his relatives. After adjusting his mentality again, Hugo began to examine himself and think about his future. Although the memories of the previous 11 years had not awakened, the mindset of that adult still subconsciously influenced his thoughts, allowing him to be far ahead in his studies. Not to mention that in the self-examination just now, he found that he had an almost photographic memory. It seems that even if I can't become a wizard, my prospects are very good, Hugo thought, not to mention the family background of his parents being dentists and owning a dental clinic in London, as well as the 30 years of prophetic advantage brought by the awakening of his previous life's memories. Just his academic level alone, as long as he maintains it, is destined for a bright future, especially when he recalled that the reason he was going out before falling into the pool was because he and Hermione had completed the final round of interviews at Charterhouse School. After the interview, the news he received was that it was basically certain that both of them would be admitted. You should know that this public school is one of the top 10 middle schools in England, and those who can graduate from it can basically obtain very good prospects. Therefore, on the way back, he and his sister were chattering non-stop, but misfortune followed happiness. After returning by bus, they unfortunately encountered a mad dog on the road, and it was when Hugo was promoting the spirit of a man and diverting the dog away from Hermione that he fled in a panic, and then fell into the artificial lake. Fortunately, someone on the lakeside at the time bravely drove away the vicious dog and rescued him from the lake and sent him to the hospital. Being an ordinary person with a promising future is also pretty good. As he thought this, Hugo looked at the sky outside the window slowly brightening and subconsciously reached into the quilt to take out his mobile phone to pass the time, but he unexpectedly felt a hard cube near his thigh. Chapter 2. Nice to meet you, my Admiral. Actually, Hugo realized something was wrong the moment he reached into the blanket. After all, he shouldn't have a phone on him right now. In this era, even the first-generation brick-like mobile phones were rare, let alone the smartphones he used in his previous life. But unexpectedly, his hand inside the blanket really did bump into something hard. And when he took this hard object out, he was surprised to find that it was the phone he had with him when he had the car accident. What is this? A superpower or magic? Hugo looked at the phone in his hand, his face filled with disbelief. After all, it was impossible for such a phone to exist in this era. After parting the curtains in front of the hospital bed and seeing that no one was paying attention, he focused his attention on the phone in his hand. After carefully checking the external condition of the phone, he pressed the power button with a slightly trembling thumb. With a slight vibration, the phone screen lit up. Hugo looked at the phone screen with excitement, but after 5 minutes, the phone remained the same, with the white screen unchanged, looking as if it had crashed. After waiting another 3 minutes, Hugo cautiously tapped the phone, which was still unresponsive. As a result, the phone screen suddenly turned blue, and a large number of characters, both familiar and unfamiliar, quickly scrolled across the screen, while the phone vibrated continuously. Damn it, is it broken? Seeing this scene, cold sweat immediately broke out. After all, this phone was likely his golden finger, and if it broke, it would be really troublesome. Just as he was examining the phone back and forth, a crackling sound of electricity suddenly came from the phone. Hearing this sound, Hugo immediately turned the phone over so that the screen faced him. To his surprise, a delicate white arm, only the size of his finger, was extending from the now pure blue screen. Sadako. Hugo's eyes widened when he saw this arm, but he was reluctant to drop the phone in his hand. After all, this phone was very likely his golden finger, and what was the difference between a transmigrator without a golden finger and a salted fish? So, in order not to be a salted fish, Hugo endured the fear in his heart, held the phone in his hand, and stared intently at the phone screen. Of course, this wasn't purely because of his bravery. The fact that it was daytime and that the hand was very small were the main reasons why Hugo was able to remain so calm. "Admiral, please help me. This barrier is too difficult to break through." Just as the owner of this small arm poked her head out of the screen, revealing her messy silver hair, this female ghost, who looked more and more like Sadako, let out a mature female voice that completely contradicted her image. "What's going on?" Hugo frowned. He originally thought that the situation might develop in the direction of a horror movie, but now it seemed that this was not the case. "May I ask who you are?" Seeing that this little guy who crawled out of the phone screen seemed to be able to communicate, Hugo took a deep breath and asked, "My name is Victory. I am the Victory-class ship of the line. I am very happy to meet you in this world, my admiral," she said, and the little fellow, who looked like a female, raised her head. Unlike the terrifying and ferocious face of Sadako, what appeared before Hugo was a large, amethyst-like beautiful eye. He could even see a small beauty mark beside the eye. However, when she used her other hand to brush away the messy silver hair that covered the right side of her face, Hugo realized that her right eye was covered by a black eye patch. But even so, it did not affect her beautiful appearance in the slightest. At least, from Hugo's point of view, the appearance of this young woman had surpassed that of all the women he had known in both his lives. From her upper body that was revealed from the screen, she seemed to be wearing a black military uniform with gold trim. At the same time, there was a beautiful ruby brooch on her collar. This very special dress, as well as her previous address to Hugo, and her appearance, quickly made Hugo think of something. "Aren't you from that slightly outdated ship girl game on my phone?" Hugo stared at the little guy, who was about the size of a figurine, and said, but before he could finish speaking, she waved her hand with great momentum and interrupted him. "You're right, and you're wrong," the little person said, staring at Hugo's eyes with her purple eye. "To you, that was indeed a game, but to us now, that's not necessarily the case." "Okay, whatever you say." Hugo was stunned by this answer. He originally wanted to say that a game is just a game. But considering that he was now in this world with magic, it was very reasonable that many things were different from his previous life. "It's so good that you can explain this clearly, my admiral." Victory was very satisfied that Hugo could accept the situation so quickly. Then, she grabbed the edge of the phone with both hands, raised her small face, and showed a pitiful expression. "Now that you know who I am, can you pull me out first?" "Okay, no problem." Considering the fact that the little guy could climb out without his help and her current friendly attitude, Hugo placed the index finger of his left hand in front of her for her to grab, and then pulled her out of the screen little by little. "I'm really sorry to let you see me in such a mess." After coming out of the screen, Victory quickly tied her messy hair into a bun and straightened the military uniform on her body. Then, she said to Hugo in a slightly apologetic tone, "As an excellent Royal Navy officer, this really shouldn't have happened." "Okay, can you tell me what's going on?" Hugo asked after seeing that the other party had gotten rid of the previous embarrassment. He really didn't understand how the paper dolls from his previous life's mobile phone game could come to life and run out of the phone. "Congratulations, my admiral, you have been chosen by Elia and Gaia of your homeland." The ship girl, who seemed to be very serious, suddenly said something silly. "Don't joke around. Since you can recognize my identity, you should know that I'm not the age I appear to be on the surface," Hugo said with a slight upward curve of his lips. "I've passed the Chunibao age of loving to dream, but what I said is true," Victory said with a serious face. "My appearance here is really related to the two great beings, Elia and Gaia, of our homeland." Chapter 3: The Whole Story. Fortunately, the first ship girl to arrive in this world was Victory, a teacher at the academy, and not Quincy, the embodiment of wisdom in blue. So, 15 minutes later, Hugo figured out why this thing, which seemed to be his golden finger, had appeared in his hand. According to Victory, every world possesses a crystal wall system, and countless crystal wall systems float in the boundless void, forming a nearly infinite world. Hugo's crossing, whether fortunate or unfortunate, stemmed from a collision of crystal wall systems. Although the collision was minor, both sides still had things fall into the other's crystal wall system. According to the rules of crystal wall collisions, the exchange between the two crystal wall systems must be equal. If I remember correctly, before the creation halls Elia and Gaia sent us to this world, I seem to hear them say that our homeland's crystal wall system accidentally took away a black wizard who had been sealed from this world during a previous collision. "Someone named High something, Hepburn?" Hugo asked, only to see the small ship girl nod frantically. "That's right, that's the pronunciation, it should be him." At the time, They said that because they took away something very important and powerful from Earth in this world, they simply packed us, the things from another world connected to you, and you together and sent us over. After all, you were already dead at that time and wouldn't cause much trouble to the original world. That black wizard won't cause trouble to my homeland, will he? Hugo asked, sounding a little worried. After all, according to the setting in some fanfiction, Hepburn was a very powerful and evil black wizard. If he arrived in Hugo's homeland, he would definitely cause great damage, especially since a single Hepburn could make the two big shots of his world send over those hundreds of ship girls. Hugo felt that this was enough to illustrate the power of that black wizard. Your understanding is a bit off, my admiral, Victory said, spreading her hands. This equivalence only refers to the equivalence of the items exchanged between the two crystal wall systems, and does not mean that everything on every planet in the crystal wall system must be equal. As for your concern about Hepburn, it's not a problem, because your homeland is a purely technological world. So, in that world, he is just an old man without any magic. Moreover, the last thing we heard those two big shots say before we left seemed to be that because that Hepburn had lived for hundreds of years using magic, he died on the spot after arriving on Earth, a world completely devoid of extraordinary power, and even his bones weathered away. That sounds like good news indeed. Hugo let out a long sigh. Only then did he have the mind to discuss the specifics of his golden finger with this hand-sized Victory ship girl. If you look at it from the perspective of that series of novels from your previous life, your golden finger is obviously a summoning-type golden finger, Victory said softly, changing her posture and sitting on Hugo's bedside. As the representative of the ship girls sent over by the two supreme controllers of Hugo's homeland, she naturally received a lot of information about Hugo's world, so what she said was very easy for Hugo to understand. That is to say, you can summon all the ship girls you had in the game in your previous life. And also summon other things from the game to strengthen yourself, Victory said, tilting her head and looking at Hugo. I think this should help you gain a foothold in this not-so-peaceful world. Sounds pretty good. Hugo raised an eyebrow suddenly, a look of excitement on his face, but he quickly calmed down. But it shouldn't be as simple as me being able to summon everything right now, right? After all, you just said that the most basic rule of the world is balance. It would be too unbalanced if that were the case. You're right, Admiral. Victory nodded, and then explained the methods and limitations of using this golden finger. Just as Hugo had thought, even if this was a gift from his homeland, it was impossible for him to just lie in bed and easily summon all the ship girls. To summarize, there are 4 rules. First, the summoned ship girls must be the ship girls that Hugo had previously obtained in the game. Fortunately, he had played the game for several years, and all the ship girls were neatly arranged, so he wouldn't miss any 1 second. To summon new ship girls, one must find the bonds of those ship girls, which may be a certain place or a certain thing. Fortunately, Victory said at this time that she could detect the specific location of those bonds within a certain distance, so he wouldn't be blindly bumping around like a headless fly. Third, and most importantly, to make those ship girls who do not belong to this world appear in this world, a certain price must be paid. According to Victory, that is to exchange fate points by changing the original fate of this world to summon ship girls. Fourth, in addition to summoning ship girls, fate points can also be used to exchange game avatars to strengthen oneself. Besides that, as the Admiral, Hugo can also exchange money for some special skills of those summoned ship girls. You currently have 11 fate points, Victory said after explaining these 4 rules. This is determined by your identity and your existence. After all, the story of the heroine's brother did not exist in this world originally, so for every year you live in this world, you will gain 1 fate point, and to summon ship girls, different ship girls require different points, but the rules are also very simple. Among them, small warships require 1 point, medium warships require 3 points, and large warships require 5 points. Then how can I get more fate points? Hugo asked. If he simply relied on age to grow, he estimated that he wouldn't be able to summon a few ship girls before he died. It's very simple, as long as you, Admiral, can change some of the plots in your memory, Victory said, jumping onto the blanket in front of Hugo. Of course, not all plots can provide fate points, but I will remind you when you encounter an event that can gain fate points. After explaining everything, Hugo slowly calmed down from the excitement of obtaining the golden finger. Then, following Victory's instructions, he used his will to put the mobile phone, this medium, into his body, and looked out the window at the scenery outside the window, while muttering to himself, the Granger family, dentists, sister, Hermione Granger, hey, this is truly a magical day. Hugo, what are you mumbling about here? As soon as Hugo's voice fell, the curtain used to shield the patient next to him was opened, and then his twin sister Hermione in this life walked over. Why are you sitting up? I remember the doctor asked you to lie down and rest properly now. It's okay. I was just thinking about those questions during our interview before. Hugo shrugged, then stretched his neck to look past Hermione's shoulder to the back and asked, why did only you come over? Where are Mom and Dad? Chapter 4 Discharge. They're busy with their work again, just like always. Hermione shrugged like an adult, then took a bamboo basket out from behind her. Look at the breakfast I prepared for you, a fantastic tuna salad sandwich. I just asked the doctor, and he said you can eat this. It's just a little scratch. Did the X-ray the doctor took yesterday show that there's nothing wrong with the bones in my head? You really didn't need to come all the way here to bring me food, Hugo said, taking the small bamboo basket from Hermione's hand and opening the lid. Seeing the sandwich placed on a clean handkerchief and a bottle of milk next to it, it tastes pretty good, Hugo said after taking a big bite and chewing. He had been interested in all kinds of sauces and meats in both his lives, and when Hermione made these sandwiches herself, she didn't just put a little bit of meat and a lot of vegetables like his parents did. Instead, she put a lot of tuna and mayonnaise between the two slices of bread. The only two lettuce leaves looked more like decorations. It suited Hugo's carnivorous tastes very well. I'm glad you like it. I used a whole can of sardines today. As she said that, Hermione raised her small face, her face full of expressions that said, hurry up and praise me, then you must have worked hard, Hugo said, suddenly revealing a mischievous smile and asking, then how much did you eat? Half. I didn't eat a bite. I put it all in the bread for you. Hermione almost blurted out the truth, but quickly regained her composure and said, you got hurt for me. How could I, as your sister, steal your food? Hermione, I would definitely believe you if you wipe off that bit of mayonnaise with tuna on the corner of your mouth. Hugo pointed to the right corner of his mouth, indicating it. Then he saw Hermione gasp softly and took out a handkerchief from her pocket, desperately wiping her mouth. The two of them had grown up together in these 11 years, so they knew each other very well, and some small actions were difficult to hide from each other's eyes. For example, this time Hugo knew that Hermione must have eaten a lot of tuna without telling her parents, and then used the excuse of cooking for Hugo, the patient, to blame all the missing tuna on him. Unlike the Hermione that Hugo saw in novels and movies in his previous life, this Hermione, as his sister in this life, was just as studious, smart, and serious. But she didn't have that faint arrogance and lack of security. He guessed that this was probably because of his existence. After all, a dentist's job is indeed very busy, and if both husband and wife are dentists, then they would not have much time and energy to take care of their children. Therefore, the original Hermione's slight flaws in personality were also very normal, and in this world, Hermione, as Hugo's sister, might have stronger interpersonal skills than the Hermione in that world because she had always had a peer by her side to accompany her. However, correspondingly, this Hermione was much more lively. For example, this kind of behavior of secretly eating tuna and then blaming Hugo was definitely something that the original Hermione would not have done. After this little interlude passed, the two of them returned to their usual state and started chatting. Hugo also learned from her that the reason why his parents didn't come to see him today was partly because his condition was indeed not serious and they didn't need to take care of him. On the other hand, it was because they were very busy and couldn't spare enough time to see Hugo, and the situation was also related to Hugo. Although he didn't awaken the memories of his previous life in the previous 11 years, those memories hidden deep in his soul would still vaguely affect himself and his family. For example, under his intentional or unintentional hints, Mr. Granger discovered the development potential of that big eastern country 3 or 4 years ago, and then invested in the business of dentures and false teeth materials in a special zone. After all, Britain is a bourgeois country, and everyone wants to become a big capitalist, and Mr. Granger is no exception. And the reason why he and Mrs. Granger were busy with work this morning was to quickly finish all the patients in the morning and then go to sign a factory expansion agreement with partners from that country. After talking for a while, Hermione took out a small chess box from under the clean handkerchief at the bottom of the basket and played chess with Hugo. After playing for a while, Hermione borrowed a few books from the hospital's library and read them with Hugo. According to her, it was just as lonely to read at home alone now, so she might as well stay here and accompany her brother. After all, Reading is reading no matter where you do it. It wasn't until after dinner in the evening that the Grangers hurried to the hospital to visit their son. Judging from the smiles on his parents' faces, the business deal tonight must have gone well. "Sorry, son, we're late," Mr. Granger apologized to Hugo after entering the door. "The negotiation for that business took much longer than we expected. Fortunately, I called my high school classmate who is a lawyer to help, and we reached an agreement today. We rushed here as soon as we finished talking half an hour ago, but we didn't expect to get stuck in traffic again, so we only arrived now." "It's okay, Dad," Hugo said with a smile. "Actually, I feel like my injuries aren't serious at all. You don't need to come see me every day. Seriously, I think I can go home tonight. You did hit your head, and injuries to that area should never be taken lightly," Mrs. Granger said with a worried look. But seeing Hugo showing his absolute determination not to stay here any longer, she asked the doctor to come and examine his wound and his physical condition. "Are you the child's parents?" The doctor came in and examined Hugo's wound, first confirming the identities of the Grangers, and then said, "His recovery is much better than we expected. Mainly, the bump on his head should have only caused him a temporary concussion and unconsciousness, and there are no after effects that we were worried about before. So he doesn't need to stay in the hospital tonight and can go home directly." Saying this, the doctor's face showed a smile. "But you must remember to disinfect and change his dressing every day." "Understood, thank you, doctor." After seeing the doctor off, the four of them immediately began to pack up, and 10 minutes later they successfully left the hospital with their luggage. "You did a very good job protecting your sister." Mr. Granger patted Hugo on the shoulder on the way back and said, "I can say that you are a real man now. But next time you encounter such a situation, you can think about whether there are other better ways, such as calling those adults who can handle these things, or using some weapons." In such a warm atmosphere, Hugo smoothly returned to his home in this world. Then everyone started to prepare dinner in a hurry. After all, dinner was a bit late today, and everyone hoped to have a good meal tonight. Chapter 5 Destination, Imperial War Museum. After everyone in the house had returned to their rooms to sleep, Hugo called out Victory, preparing to summon his first ship girl. But the problem now was, how should he summon a ship girl? According to Victory, as long as he came within 3 meters of that bond item or location and summoned the phone, he would be able to summon the ship girl from that location through some kind of mystical connection. But this presented him with another huge difficulty. He had to make sure no one was around during the process. Otherwise, the sudden appearance of a living person would be difficult to explain. But for Hugo, who was only 11 years old, it was difficult for him to get the chance to be alone. However, after telling Victory about the difficulties he was facing, Victory quickly came up with a highly feasible suggestion. She told Hugo that since destiny points could be used not only to summon ship girls but also to exchange for those avatars from the previous game to strengthen himself, why didn't he exchange for an avatar that would facilitate his actions? "So, after I exchange for those avatars, I can become the appearance of the avatar and inherit some of the power represented by the avatar." After listening to Victory's detailed explanation, Hugo felt that he seemed to have some misunderstandings about certain things before, to the point that he completely underestimated this method of exchanging power for himself. "Yes, that's right," Victory nodded and continued. "However, because you have only summoned me, the ship girl who serves as a guide, you can only exchange for 2 avatars." Looking down at his phone, Hugo found that most of the dozens of avatars were dark, with only 2 avatars very bright. One was an image of an African-American male officer wearing sunglasses, and the other was a female officer with short blonde hair. "Let's choose this African-American officer, because he looks very burly and should be able to provide enough help for our future actions," Hugo, who didn't want to cross-dress, said as he followed Victory's instructions and used his consciousness to select the avatar he wanted to exchange for. Because it was a beginner avatar, it only consumed a few destiny points instantly. A heat wave spread from the phone in Hugo's hand to his body. When the heat wave ended, he felt that he had more things in his mind, and at the same time, the strength in his body became much stronger. "What is this?" Hugo said as he took out a hand gripper from the corner and squeezed it hard, and was surprised to see that the hand gripper showed that his one-handed grip strength had reached 52 kilograms, which is the excellent level among adult men. "Your current strength is equivalent to a strong and somewhat trained adult male," Victory reminded him at this time. "Now search in your brain. In addition to the improvement of physical fitness, these avatars should also have other effects, not just simply making you stronger." "Let me see." Hugo closed his eyes, and sure enough, he felt some special information in his mind. The knowledge contained in this information is not very much, but it is relatively practical. For example, this knowledge includes simple firearms shooting, firearms maintenance, fighting knowledge, and a series of military skills. After all, this avatar is an African American naval officer, and these basic skills are certainly not lacking in addition. The most powerful thing about this avatar is that it allows Hugo to directly transform into the appearance of that African American naval officer, which gives Hugo greater confidence in his next actions. After all, in this era when surveillance cameras are becoming popular, it is obviously not very convenient to do some things with his own face, perhaps because the power of this system is strong enough. It can even change clothes together when transforming. This also avoids the terrible possibility that he would have to run in naked every time he transforms because his body shape changes too much. Hugo's requirements for the first ship girl were also very simple, that is, the combat power must be strong enough. After all, this world is not very safe, and he felt that it would be best to find a few powerful ship girls to protect himself before his strength became stronger. In other words, the first ship girl to be summoned can basically be determined to be a large warship that requires 5 destiny points to summon. By the way, you said before that you can sense the location of the ship girl's summoning medium within a certain distance. How much is this certain distance? After roughly moving around in the bedroom to adapt to his new body, Hugo turned his head and asked Victory a key question. This is not very certain, because this distance will change with a change of your own strength. Victory shrugged. For example, now that you have obtained the first avatar and strengthened yourself for the first time, my current detection radius has increased from 100 meters at the beginning to about 500 meters now. If it's 500 meters, then it will be much more convenient to do a lot of things. Hugo smiled after hearing Victory's words. I think my parents and my sister are already asleep. Now is a good time to set off. After saying that, Hugo transformed into the appearance of that African American officer again and let Victory slip into his clothes pocket. Then he climbed onto the desk, opened the window of his room, and then climbed down to the lawn along the drainpipe next to the window. Finally, he crossed the lawn and took a taxi, speeding towards the northeast. Where are we going? After getting in the car, Victory's voice rang in Hugo's mind. As Hugo's guide, in addition to ordinary conversations, they can also communicate directly in their minds through the connection of their souls. Go to the center of London, Hugo said. It's 10:30 p.m. now. We'll go directly to the Imperial War Museum in London. The road is relatively empty at this time, and it is estimated that we will be able to reach our destination in a dozen minutes. You're right, that's indeed a good idea. Victory also reacted at this time. After all, your current home is near London, and the place around here that can provide enough choices for summoning shipgirls is this museum. Yes, that's what I thought, Hugo admitted, and at the same time, the taxi sped all the way to the city center on the highway. In the early 1990s, London was not as congested as it would be in the future, especially after 10:30 p.m. So just 15 minutes later, the black taxi stopped at the entrance of the Imperial War Museum. After getting out of the car, Hugo took Victory, who was sitting on his shoulder, to an inconspicuous place, and then Victory summoned a small 3-dimensional map that only Hugo could see in front of him. Sure enough, we came to the right place this time, Victory said, looking at the considerable number of red dots on the blue map. But next, we have to choose carefully. Chapter 6: Locking on the Target. Due to the excessive number of red dots on the map, Hugo and Victory immediately huddled together to plan their search route, avoiding wasting too much time in areas that weren't their target for the day. After all, he only had 10 fate points on hand and couldn't afford to freely summon shipgirls. This one on the Thames River is definitely Belfast. We don't need her for now. Hugo started by looking at the sparser red dots on the periphery and quickly identified what several of the red dots represented on the map, eliminating them one by one. The one in front of the museum entrance should be the monitor HMS Roberts, which isn't something I urgently need right now, because he was interested in military affairs and warships in his previous life. He naturally researched a lot of information about those warship relics. Although he couldn't be comprehensive, he certainly wouldn't miss some of the more famous ones. So, that means we have to go inside. Looking at the cluster of red dots inside the museum building on the map, Hugo gave Victory a troubled expression. Do you know how to sneak in? I've always been an ordinary person and haven't learned things like breaking and entering. The Royal Navy fights enemies head-on. Victory first straightened her back, revealing a proud expression, then deflated. That's why you say Japanese ship girls are better at this kind of sneaky business. While we British ship girls usually charge straight in through the front door when faced with this kind of problem, forget it then, I'll figure out something myself. Hugo felt that the British ship girl's head-on approach wasn't suitable for his current situation, so he simply stood up and walked around the museum. Soon, he discovered that the museum's security seemed very lax, and there weren't many patrols. At least, it wasn't on the same level as the British Museum, of course. This was understandable. After all, the artifacts in this museum only had significant historical value but not much economic value, so it was understandable that they weren't very concerned about security. Naturally, in this situation, the difficulty for Hugo to sneak in was reduced by more than an order of magnitude. That should be a toilet window. After walking around the museum, Victory pointed to a small window on the side wall of the building and said, "I think I can use my unique ability to switch between the real and unreal to enter the room and open the window from the inside, and then you can climb in through this window." "That's not a problem," Hugo nodded. After all, the toilet was only about 3 stories above the ground, and there were many protrusions and drain pipes fixed to the wall that he could grab onto. Moreover, the skills he had acquired before included climbing. After all, climbing was a compulsory course for sailors, so, after confirming that there was no one else around, Hugo climbed up the exterior wall and, with Victory's help from inside the room, squeezed in through the open window. Sure enough, the cubicle on the left and the urinal on the right indicated that Hugo's current foothold was exactly as he had judged. Tiptoeing to the toilet door, Hugo peeked outside. Most of the lights in the exhibition hall were off, but some emergency lights were still on, which created a lot of shadows and blind spots, making it easier for Hugo to move around. There are only 2 cameras, and they're the fixed-angle type, with large blind spots. Victory said through their sole connection as she slipped into the hall. "Here, I only saw 2 security guards patrolling here. If I'm not mistaken, there won't be more than 20 security guards in the entire building, and they were not very alert. Can you control those monitors?" Hugo asked. "If I remember correctly, don't existences like you, similar to system spirits, have the ability to modify electronic devices?" "That's because the main bodies of those system spirits are related to electronic products." Victory's voice in his mind became somewhat helpless. "In the era when an old girl like me served, there weren't even electrical facilities, so how could I know how to operate a computer?" "Okay, I understand," Hugo shrugged helplessly. He had indeed forgotten that Victory was just a sailing warship back then. It seemed that his system spirit was restricted by the warship itself because she was a ship girl and wasn't the omnipotent system spirit he had imagined. Fortunately, the security personnel here seemed a little careless, so Hugo quickly used the blind spots created by the exhibits and terrain to slowly approach the exhibition hall that had previously shown red dots on the map. "It feels like there are only small things inside here." After entering the exhibition hall, Hugo discovered that this small exhibition hall was completely different from the large exhibition hall outside. The large exhibition hall outside displayed actual objects of cannons, missiles, and fighter jets, while this small exhibition hall was full of glass cabinets, which appeared to contain small items from the entrance. But that was also good, because Hugo didn't know what kind of commotion summoning would cause at that time, so this independent small exhibition hall was convenient for him to act, and he wouldn't have to worry about the security guards coming to check like in a large exhibition hall. What's even better was that, perhaps because various electronic devices weren't so popular in this era, only the main exhibition hall had a fixed camera facing the entrance of small exhibition halls like this. And Hugo had successfully avoided the surveillance when he first entered by using a sculpture at the entrance of the exhibition hall as decoration. "The nearest patrol team will arrive in an hour, so you now have 55 minutes to find the target you're looking for," Victory said in his mind, standing on the trash can at the entrance and looking at the patrol registration form hanging on the wall. "I'll keep watch for you outside. I'll remind you if anyone comes." "Understood." After replying in his mind, Hugo began to inspect the glass cabinets, using the dim wall lamps. The glass cabinets contained small items such as a military cap, a badge, a piece of wood painted with paint, or a piece of broken steel plate. One of the most distinctive was an iron ball embedded in wood, with golden writing on it. When Hugo passed by that display case, he curiously glanced at the writing on the iron ball and discovered that it described the origin of this artifact, a piece of ship plank from the age of sailing warships that was hit by a cannonball and kept as a souvenir of that war during repairs. Of course, such an ancient artifact wasn't the target Hugo was looking for. After carefully reading all the nameplates under the artifacts in the room, he quickly selected his target. Unlike what he had originally planned, Hugo selected not one, but two targets this time. On the one hand, it was because he had just found the bond items that could summon two large ship girls. If he could summon them both at once, there was no need to divide it into two summons. For him, one secret infiltration was enough. On the other hand, Hugo also considered that ship girls would be independent beings with their own joys, sorrows, and moods after being summoned. But the current situation didn't allow the ship girls to live with him. So, summoning two at once would allow them to keep each other company and avoid being too lonely. Chapter 7 Summoning Success. Whether it was for ease of explanation or some kind of perverse amusement, the two summoning mediums that Hugo had selected were placed in adjacent glass display cases. One was a somewhat old-fashioned naval ceremonial sword, while the other was a rather old box lid, with some patterns painted on it in mottled gold paint. The world of Harry Potter and Hugo's previous world should be very similar, at least in terms of major historical events. This is why Hugo was able to summon those ship girls using things from this world. However, on the other hand, although there were no major changes in the general direction of history, there were still some differences in the details. For example, the box lid in these two exhibits, like in his previous life, was one of the very few relics that drifted ashore after the Hoods magazine explosion, but it was not placed in this museum. As for the ceremonial sword of the Vittorio Veneto's captain, he had never even heard of it in his previous life. But no matter what, having these things here definitely made it easier for Hugo to summon the ship girls from his game. So, after silently thanking the two great gods of this world, Gaia and Elia, he began to prepare to summon the ship girls. What should I do now? Standing in front of the two closely spaced glass cabinets, Hugo inquired to Victory, who was on the lookout outside, through their soul connection. Do I need to do anything, like chant some spells, or perform some rituals? Or dance around these two glass cabinets like a shaman? It's not that complicated. Summoning is a very serious matter, definitely not the feudal superstitions you just mentioned, Victory said righteously. The method of summoning them should have been connected to your soul since you came to this world. Now, feel it carefully. It should be as smooth as eating and breathing for you. Okay, I understand. Hugo closed his eyes, slowed his breathing, and slowly entered a meditative state. When his heart calmed down, he saw the phone he had previously taken into his body, in a phantom state, floating quietly in his heart. At the same time, he felt his fingertips twitching with his heartbeat, as if something was about to gush out of his fingertips. Just as Victory had said before, this thing was as instinctive to Hugo as breathing. Less than a minute after entering the meditative state, he suddenly opened his eyes and quickly pointed his right index finger at the two glass cabinets. In an instant, two light spheres the size of marbles flew out from the tip of Hugo's index finger, and quickly became brighter. When they merged into the box lid and the saber respectively, they were as bright as two small suns. After containing these two light spots, the two items slowly emitted a soft white light from the inside out. Then, strands of pure white light quickly depicted and outlined the two glass cabinets. In just a few blinks of an eye, two miniature warships, completely composed of points and lines, floated quietly on the glass cabinets. After more light filled in the blank spaces of points and lines in these two miniature warships, the two light-constructed warships slowly flew down from the glass cabinets to the ground, and then quickly expanded. At the same time, they released a brighter light, so that Hugo had to hold out his hand to cover his eyes through his fingers. Hugo saw the two light clusters rapidly changing. Like red-hot steel under a 10,000-ton hydraulic press, they began to deform. The entire silhouette looked like it was slowly changing from a ship to a human figure. When the light dissipated, two women, one large and one small, with ship equipment on their bodies, stood quietly in front of Hugo. One looked like a tall 17 or 18-year-old girl, with golden hair draped over her shoulders and a blue short cape. She wore a pair of red half-rimmed glasses on her face, and also held a teacup and saucer in her hand. The other looked much shorter, with a pair of ruby-like eyes and snow-white hair, wearing a black suspender skirt and holding a cup of coffee in her hand. She looked like she was only 11 or 12 years old. Greetings, I am the pride of the Royal Navy, Hood. Commander, would you like a cup of black tea? Buonasera, Signor Miraglio, belonging to the Royal Italian Navy, Vittorio Veneto class battleship Vittorio Veneto. I am honored to meet you, sir. I will trouble you to assist me with the military affairs from now on. The two voices sounded almost simultaneously in the exhibition hall. After introducing themselves, the two girls put away the things in their hands and almost simultaneously gave Hugo a military salute. Although they were just two beautiful girls, Hugo felt a unique killing intent from veteran soldiers who had survived hundreds of battles on a battlefield of corpses and blood from their military salute. It wasn't until they finished saluting that Hugo, recovering from his shock, reacted and returned the salute in a flustered manner. However, before he had time to say anything to the two ship girls, Victory's voice suddenly sounded in his mind. "My Admiral, the commotion you made when you summoned them just now was too loud. Now there are two teams of security guards running towards you. Although they look a little fat and are panting when they run, they should be able to get to you in 5 or 6 minutes. By the way, did you succeed in summoning them? Everything is okay, now we have to retreat." Hugo contacted Victory while waving to signal the two ship girls to follow him, and then quickly ran towards the bathroom he had just run past. As he ran out the door and turned the corner, he saw the two ship girls had put away their ship equipment and were following closely behind him. When he ran out of the passage in front of him and sprinted towards the bathroom just now, he happened to gently grab Victory, who had just jumped on the railing to observe the security guard's movements, and put him in his upper coat pocket. When the 4 security guards who had been alarmed entered the exhibition hall where Hugo and the others had been before and began to conduct a careful but destined to be futile inspection, Hugo had successfully led the two ship girls and the instructor Victory, a total of 3 people, to a road on the south side of the museum, lined with restaurants and shops on both sides. After crossing this bustling street and turning west onto a seemingly deserted street, Hugo returned to his original appearance and stopped in a corner, then began to ask the two ship girls some questions about their situation, etc. After all, the game background is the game background, but it is another matter when the real ship girls stand in front of you. As an admiral, you naturally have to understand the girls' situation in this regard. Fortunately, when facing the admiral or commander, these ship girls will not hide any secrets and are completely honest with each other. So naturally, they know everything and say everything to the questions Hugo asks. From the two girls' explanations, Hugo also knew what ship girls actually represented. They were actually equivalent to heroic spirits, a kind of non-flesh creatures with their own lives and souls at the same time. They have 3 states. One is the state they are in now, which looks like ordinary humans. Ship girls usually maintain this state. One is the combat state with ship equipment when they are first summoned. And the last one is the deployed state, which can move on the sea in the state of a warship. However, although they are not carbon-based creatures like most creatures in this world, they can still eat like humans. However, unlike humans, daily eating and drinking can only maintain their ordinary human state, and if they want to fight using ship equipment, they must carry out additional oil, ammunition, steel, and aluminum resupply. Fortunately, according to Hood, they are now in a fully supplied state, enough resources to fight 3 or 5 Jutland-style naval battles. Moreover, because they are accepted by this world, they can replenish 110 supplies from the port area, which is still in a certain independent small world, every day. Of course, if you want to resupply quickly, you must summon a supply ship, Hood concluded on this matter. They all have special equipment that can continuously produce the required 4 resources as long as they can access the sea. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 8 Plan. Being in the same world as the commander is just wonderful. After a brief exchange about their recent situations, Hood spoke in standard aristocratic English, unhurried and measured. The past 11 years in the naval base, filled with nothing but expeditions and exercises, were truly boring. What about the Abyssals? Hugo asked. If he remembered correctly, when he played the game, there would always be a major event every few months where the ship girls would beat up those Abyssals. In theory, it shouldn't have been so boring for them. I thought they would be harassing you. Since you came to this world, all Abyssals with self-awareness have disappeared. Since we woke up more than a decade ago, what we often do is just beat up those ordinary Abyssals who are as stiff and robotic as machines, constantly popping up from various places. Veneto, who appeared petite, said. Most importantly, that world wasn't very real. No matter what we did there, it felt like sleepwalking. If it weren't for being able to sense that you, Commander, were closer to us than before, I think the sisters would have gone crazy long ago. I'm sorry, I only found out about your existence in the last few days, Hugo said apologetically to the 2 ship girls in front of him. If I had known earlier, I think I would have. You don't need to apologize, my commander. Before he could finish speaking, Veneto and Hood stepped forward and each took one of his hands, and then Hood further explained. For us, being able to feel your presence, Commander, from such a close distance is enough to make us happy. And we also know that you did your best to find us at this time, but it still made you suffer. Hugo sighed softly, then suddenly thought of something very important. By the way, do you have any identification and money on you? Because of Hugo's age, he couldn't bring these two ship girls back to his home. So he looked at the two ship girls, one big and one small, with concern and asked about their current identities, while reaching into his pocket to feel the 700 or 800 pounds he had saved up over 5 or 6 years. We both have identification, and they are all legal. But the problem is that the money we have seems to be unusable, Hood said, taking out her passport and a stack of paper money. The passport showed that Hood was a 19-year-old British woman. But the stack of banknotes in her hand was an old version from the 1940s, which was obviously no longer usable. What about you, Veneto? After looking at the things in Hood's hand, Hugo noticed that Veneto's hands were empty, so he asked with concern. If you don't have any, I think I can. Of course, I have it too. Feeling the concern in Hugo's heart, Veneto hesitated for a few seconds and reluctantly took out her passport as well. After opening the passport and taking a look, Hugo immediately understood why Veneto was unwilling to take out this passport just now, because the passport showed that Veneto was born on April 28, 1980, which meant she was even younger than Hugo. As a battleship girl, she naturally didn't want to be seen as an elementary school student. But unfortunately, the will of the world arranged a birthday for her in this world that clearly didn't align with her wishes. Okay, don't be angry. Looking at Veneto with a pouty expression, Hugo earnestly returned Veneto's passport and a stack of equally unusable old Italian lire. And at the same time handed over the only 700 plus pounds he had on him. You guys take this money and find a place to stay first, and I'll think of a way to figure out where to settle you. No need to bother so much, my commander. Veneto felt very happy in her heart about Hugo handing her the money, because she knew that this meant her commander didn't see her as a child because of her appearance, but as an adult who could take on her responsibilities. But happy as she was, Veneto still politely declined the money Hugo handed over, and said, "Don't forget that Hood and I are not ordinary humans. For us, there are quite a few ways to make money." Your ways of making money, can you explain in detail what methods those are? Remembering Veneto's Sicilian mob boss side in the game setting, Hugo suddenly had an ominous premonition. As long as we have this thing, we can find money from many places. As she spoke, Veneto took out a Beretta M1938 submachine gun from her ship rigging space. On the other side, Hood even more exaggeratedly took out a Chicago typewriter. Ladies, listen to me. Looking at the guns in the hands of the two girls, Hugo felt cold sweat running down his back. He quickly raised his hands in front of his chest to strengthen his tone and said, "I think you should know that this world has changed when you came. Now is a very peaceful era. At least in the capital of England, using weapons of this level is very excessive." "I don't think so." In the next instant, Hood, who had put the gun back into her ship rigging space, shook her head, and then seriously lowered her head to look into Hugo's eyes and said, "After all, I understand London better than you. The peaceful and orderly world you speak of only exists in a part of London, while the other side of the city is not like that." "Okay, you're right." After being silent for a few seconds, Hugo had to admit that what Hood said was true. At least in East London, especially in some areas where illegal immigrants gathered, almost the darkest side of the entire city was deposited. Even Hugo's parents had specifically warned him not to go to those dangerous places in East London, especially at night. If you have decided, then do what you feel is right in your heart. Hugo knew that if he gave an order, these ship girls would completely follow his orders. But as a commander who regarded ship girls as independent lives, he was unwilling to violate the ship girls' wishes to order them in daily life. "Thank you for your trust in us, my dear commander." Hood gave Hugo a very elegant curtsy and said, "But please rest assured, we can tell the good from the bad among humans and ensure that we will not harm the innocent. After all, we are ship girls, not those abyssal ship girls who are full of malice towards all life." Unlike the setting in the previous life's game, ship girls are not restricted from killing ordinary humans. Thinking about it, it makes sense. After all, the ship girl prototypes are all warships, and the purpose of birth is to kill. So it is certainly impossible to be that kind of pure pacifist, and having a warlike side is also reasonable. Fortunately, as ship girls, they are also, in a sense, the embodiment of various good and bright wills. So Hugo doesn't have to worry about them creating some unmanageable big news. Then I wish you all the best. Hugo raised his hand and looked at the watch on his wrist and said, "It's already 12 o'clock at night. I have to go home. Otherwise, my parents will check the room and find that I'm not at home, and I'll definitely be dead." Chapter 9 East London. Watching Hugo revert to his middle-aged black man appearance and leave in a taxi with his victory, Hood and Veneto walked shoulder to shoulder from that street back to the street in front of the museum. Then, they easily found a London tourist map for visitors to use in this famous tourist spot in central London. Looks like downtown London hasn't changed much. Looking at the tourist map, Hood quickly compared it with a London map in her mind and said, "If that's the case, I think there's a place where we can show our skills and earn some money. Let you decide our destination. This is my first time in London too." Veneto shrugged and said, "Anyway, I'll just fight when we get there, but I personally hope you can listen to me after the real fight starts. After all, I have much more experience dealing with those scum who can hardly be called human than a lady like you, Miss Hood." "Don't call me miss in such a sarcastic tone. This time, I'll show you the qualities a British soldier should have. As representatives of shipgirls from different countries, they actually have some internal competition. And this operation is regarded by the two shipgirls as an arena for the competition between British and Italian shipgirls. I'll be watching." After saying that, Veneto took out a scooter from her ship equipment space, got on it, and tilted her head to signal Hood, "Get in, you sit behind me and show me the way." "Where did you get this scooter?" Hood looked at the scooter that Veneto took out of her ship equipment space in shock. "Isn't this South Dakota's scooter? How is it in your hands now?" "I borrowed it from South Dakota at the port area before," Veneto replied simply, then looked at Hood standing there and said, "Now is not the time to consider this question. Get in the car quickly. We'd better hurry. After all, this kind of activity is not suitable for daytime." "Then what about the cameras?" After the two got on the scooter and started it, Hood, sitting in the back seat, leaned to Veneto's ear and asked, "The knowledge in my mind tells me that humans now install a lot of cameras in their cities to maintain law and order. If we are caught by those cameras, it might cause trouble for the commander." "Don't worry." The corners of Veneto's mouth raised slightly, revealing a smile. "First of all, the density of cameras in this era is completely different from that in the era when the commander came. We can easily avoid them. Secondly, the accuracy of the cameras in this era is also very questionable. It is difficult to distinguish our faces. And finally, the location where we will mainly operate later should be a very chaotic area according to you. And according to my experience in Sicily back then, the reason why those people dare to cause trouble in this kind of place is that they will definitely find a way to shield the eyes of the outside world. In our era, we killed the informants and military police who dared to come in, and in this era, it should be smashing those cameras." "Okay, what you said makes sense." Hood thought for a while and could only admit that Veneto's analysis was correct, then took out the helmets and gas masks from the ship equipment space and put them on for herself and Veneto. Although through Veneto's analysis, Hood also felt that the cameras of this era were not so terrible. It is better to prepare in advance for some things. Help. Just as the two of them were riding their scooter to a place about a block away from Whitechapel, a strange-sounding English cry for help suddenly came from a dark alley next to them. But the sound disappeared after only half a shout, as if someone had stuffed their mouth. Go and see. As shipgirls, Hood and Veneto would definitely not turn a blind eye to the cries for help from innocent people. Especially since this place can be regarded as a lawless place in the city, where outlaws like Zhang San may be active everywhere. So the two immediately rode their motorcycles towards the alley where the sound had just been made. When they arrived at the entrance of the alley, several young illegal immigrants who looked like gangsters were standing there crookedly. Behind them, two gangsters were pressing a young woman who looked like a tourist on the ground, trying to do something heinous. "Who are you?" Seeing two people wearing old-fashioned gas masks and military helmets getting off the car at the entrance of the alley, a gangster leaning against the wall walked over, constantly flicking a butterfly knife in his hand. "This is our territory, you outsiders better stay away from some things." However, when he came to the entrance of the alley where there was a street lamp, he quickly found that the two people standing at the entrance of the alley were women, so he immediately became foul-mouthed. "Oh, here are two who came to our door on their own." Bang! Before the gangster could finish his words, Hood punched him directly in the face, and the gangster immediately fell backwards. If someone took an X-ray of him at this time, they would find that his facial bones were completely fractured, just like the effect of someone swinging a blacksmith's hammer heavily on his face. Seeing this scene, The others immediately retreated. This group of gangsters immediately realized that they had provoked someone they shouldn't have. But obviously, they, who were ordinary mortals, could not escape from the hands of the ship girls at all. Only 2 minutes later, all the gangsters had their legs broken and fell to the street. Each of you tell me what bad things you have done, and then tell me who your boss is and where your lair is. Veneto held a spare machine gun barrel in her right hand and gently tapped her left hand, and the group of gangsters lying on the ground all looked at the gun barrel in her hand with fear in their memory. This petite girl had just used the hollow iron pipe in her hand to directly fracture everyone's legs, as easily as an ordinary person breaking a thumb biscuit. Let's start with you. What bad things have you done? After walking around in front of this group of losers, Veneto stopped in front of the first gangster on the left and asked, "Answer truthfully. I can tell if what you said is true. I've only ever robbed people before." The gangster's eyes moved and he said in a pitiful tone, "After all, I am very poor and haven't received a good education, so I can only use this method." Before the gangster could finish speaking, Veneto reached out and grabbed his neck, lifted him up, and then suddenly tightened her fingers. With a click, he immediately felt a sharp pain in his neck and fell into eternal darkness. "What did you find just now?" Hood, who was comforting the victim, immediately felt that Veneto had killed someone, so she asked, "Or what did this guy do?" He omitted that he killed an old man to rob a wallet when he first came to this country, and also omitted the crimes of robbery and rape many times after coming to this country. As a ship girl, it is not difficult to understand the thoughts of ordinary people. And facing this kind of indiscriminate killing of innocent people, Veneto felt that there was no need to keep them to waste food. "Okay, you did a good job," Hood nodded and said, then turned back to comfort the victim just now, but this time, she took the victim away from the entrance of the alley. Fortunately, because this place was relatively dark and the victim was facing away from the interrogation scene, she didn't see this scene, which saved Hood a lot of talking. Chapter 10 Cleaning Up. During the subsequent interrogation, Veneto executed 2 more thugs, citing one's involvement in anti-government armed groups in his hometown and his indiscriminate killing of innocent people. The other was accused of raping a woman to death. These actions terrified the surviving thugs, who eagerly confessed their crimes, revealing their superiors and hideout locations. They also disclosed the misdeeds and whereabouts of numerous other scumbags in the area. "What's going on with her?" After interrogating the thugs, Veneto met up with Hood at the alley entrance and saw the victim, who had mostly recovered. "She's a compatriot of yours, VV," Hood said, using Veneto's nickname to avoid revealing her real name. "She's a student at the Turin Academy of Fine Arts, traveling during this time. She came here tonight to see the art museums in Whitechapel, but it's already past midnight." "Is she crazy?" Veneto exclaimed in disbelief. "Isn't coming here at this hour asking for death? Even I, an Italian, know that London's East End isn't a place for ordinary people at night. She just wanted to find artistic inspiration at night," Hood replied. As a lady, she understood the occasional unconventional behavior of aspiring artists. "I imagine this isn't too strange for Italians, is it?" "That's your prejudice," Veneto countered, shaking her head. She spoke to the young woman in Italian, then, after a brief discussion with Hood, escorted her to safety on her motorcycle. Upon her return, she saw Hood tossing the thugs with broken legs into a pile in the corner. "What should we do next?" Hood asked, turning to Veneto, who had just returned and parked her motorcycle, after stacking the last thug on top of the others in the alley corner. Having obtained information about various criminal dens around Whitechapel, she sought advice from a professional regarding their next move. "We aren't gods, and we can't eliminate all evil in the world," Veneto said, approaching Hood. "But we can do our best to make the world a better place. For example, the 2 of us can eliminate the evil individuals near the Whitechapel area and re-establish true order here, and, by the way, gather enough money to establish a foothold in this world and create a solid material foundation for the arrival of our sisters later. We can't let them start from scratch like us," Hood added. "Anyway, taking money from these thugs is the fastest way for us to make money without violating our principles." They exchanged a smile, then retrieved their weapons from their ship equipment spaces and headed towards the chaotic Whitechapel area. For them, the upcoming task was merely a simple hunt. After bypassing some thugs patrolling the streets and cautiously surveying their surroundings, the 2 arrived at a 3-story red brick building. According to the confessions of the thugs, this was the most evil den in the entire area, engaging in human trafficking and flesh peddling, and sometimes selling human organs. The reason for choosing this place as their primary target was simple: Veneto and Hood hoped to rescue more innocent people, We should scout it out first, Veneto said, raising her right hand with the air of a leader, looking at Hood's chest. However, my carrier-based reconnaissance aircraft isn't very useful for indoor reconnaissance. I know what to do, Hood replied, unbuttoning her collar. Two plump cats, one ginger and one calico, emerged from her collar. She scratched the little creatures under their chins and commanded, Ginger, Fishcake, go inside and check out the situation, especially the locations of those with weapons. Meow, meow, the cats meowed softly, then silently climbed up the wall to the roof, and slipped through a gap in the roof. Throughout the process, Veneto stared at the cats with envy, mentally comparing the difference between having cats and not having cats. Damn it, Hood's expression grew increasingly grim after the cats entered the building. This startled Veneto, who was pondering the cat issue. What did you see inside? See for yourself, Hood said, transmitting everything she saw through the Admiral network to Veneto. After seeing it all, Veneto's face also turned grim. Leave no one alive after entering except for the victims, Veneto said, her voice sounding as if it could freeze anyone who heard it into ice. Humans can sometimes be kinder and nobler than us shipgirls, but some can be more evil than the abyssals. I can't understand how they can commit such atrocities against their own kind, so we were right to come here today, Hood said, her face also covered with frost. Wait 5 more minutes for Ginger and Fishcake to finish scouting, then we'll move immediately. After a long 5 minutes, the two went to the back of the building, removed their cumbersome helmets, and climbed up to the 3rd floor. Clearly, to prevent the innocent from escaping, all the windows in the rooms had been welded shut with thumb-thick steel bars, but this level of defense was obviously useless against shipgirls. Hood stepped forward and gently grabbed 2 adjacent steel bars, pulling them apart with her hands. The bars, which would have required a jack to separate for ordinary people, were forcibly bent apart, creating a gap large enough for someone to pass through upon entering the room. The 2 shipgirls immediately smelled a stench and saw a messy bed in the dark room placed in the corner. Hearing the sound behind him, the man immediately turned around. But before he could make a sound, Hood lunged forward and punched him in the neck. He convulsed and fell to the ground, his neck twisted to an unnatural angle. The little girl on the bed cowered in the corner, while Veneto and Hood, in the eerie silence, stepped over the corpse in the middle of the room and pushed open the door. The following rooms were all similar to this one, each equally horrifying. The 2 shipgirls displayed their coldest side as weapons, snapping the necks of every beast in human skin. After clearing the 3rd floor, they had Ginger guard the only stairwell, cutting off the thug's emergency escape route. Then, they crept down the stairs to the 2nd floor. Chapter 11: The Special Effects of the Anti-Japanese Drama. Stop! Just as the 2 figures appeared at the top of the stairs, a low shout came from below. Simultaneously, the sound of someone ascending the stairs echoed from below, and soon, 2 Hoods emerged from the bottom of the staircase. You actually dared to run out? Hurry up and get back, because the lighting in the stairwell was dim. The 2 men didn't notice the masks on the faces of the 2 shipgirls. They only saw blurry silhouettes and assumed that the figures descending the stairs were some of the innocent women from upstairs who had escaped from their rooms. Therefore, they loudly berated the 2 shipgirls at the same time. These 2 thugs quickened their pace, intending to recapture the escapees in their eyes. After all, such incidents happened several times every year, and each time they could earn extra rewards. What they didn't expect was that this time they had encountered Valkyries wielding weapons. The moment they approached, before the 2 thugs could even reach out, they were each struck by a punch from the 2 shipgirls, sending them crashing against the wall before sliding limply to the ground with a loud thud. If someone were to X-ray these 2 thugs, they would find that most of the bones in their bodies had cracked or even broken from the earlier attacks and impacts. However, this commotion immediately escalated, and the shouts of the other thugs echoed throughout the den. Clearly, these scumbags in the rooms were not accustomed to enemies coming to their doorstep, so they were loudly questioning each other about what had happened. Evidently, this shouting, while intended to boost their morale, also revealed their positions. Hood and Veneto simultaneously produced rifles with bayonets. Then, they used these bayonets like short spears, ruthlessly reaping the lives of the thugs in the darkness and silence. Bang! As Veneto and Hood were halfway through clearing the 2nd floor, several thugs who usually watched the premises on the 1st floor finally gathered together, grabbed their guns, and rushed up to the 2nd floor. Then, aiming at the 2 figures rushing towards them in the hallway, they pulled the triggers because the hallway was very narrow. All of these bullets struck Hood, whose armor was relatively weak. Of course, This so-called weak armor was only in comparison to battleships of the same era. At least, for the ship Girlhood, whose fleshly defense was equivalent to the thickest part of her armor, which was the 381mm homogeneous steel armor at the front of her turrets. She was virtually invincible against these light weapons, and didn't even need to activate her ship Girl-specific shield to withstand the damage. But this scene looked like something out of a horror movie to the thugs. The strange woman, who came from who knows where, was holding a rifle, and the bayonet on the front of the rifle was dripping with the blood of their comrades. And after they had just fired their guns, they saw the bullets hit the girl's body and spark, without even breaking her clothes. Upon realizing that their enemy was invincible, these thugs immediately broke down. Some uttered strange cries while futilely pulling the triggers, but before they could run out of bullets, they were easily pierced through the neck or heart by the bayonet on the rifle. Others frantically ran downstairs, trying to escape through the front door on the first floor, only to have a large black and white cat waiting at the door, directly leaving a huge gash on their necks with its claws, and then blood spurted out of the wound like a fountain. 5 minutes after entering the building, the entire place was completely silent. All that remained were the low sobs of the rescued women and the hissing sound of the last breaths of the scumbags who hadn't quite died yet. This place is cleared. Hood and Veneto, who had reunited at the front door on the first floor, smiled at each other, and then quickly walked out of the building, still holding the rifles with bayonets dripping with blood. For them, there was still much to do in the few hours before dawn, and they couldn't afford to stop. This night was like a nightmare for the scum in the Whitechapel area, because two women, who were like avenging angels to them, had cleaned up all the scum in the entire area, and even their illegally equipped military rifles could not stop the slaughter of these two angels of death. Early the next morning, everything had settled down. In the largest gang's room in the entire area, Hood took off her mask and sat rather ladylike on the sofa, sipping tea while watching the group of guys trembling below with her sapphire-like eyes. These guys were the heads of the other scum in this area. The only reason they were still alive was either because they still had a basic bottom line in their hearts, unwilling to do things that were extremely immoral, or because their strength was temporarily insufficient and they couldn't participate in those lucrative but completely inhumane businesses, so they were only temporarily spared from death. However, none of this mattered to the two ship girls. They only needed to use these people to reorganize the Whitechapel area and the shady businesses in the surrounding areas, so that the bottom line that humans should have could be restored. Of course, taking advantage of this opportunity to accumulate a fortune for themselves and the sisters who were about to come here was also very important. I know that where there is light, there is shadow, and some things are very difficult to eradicate, Hood said, placing the teacup and saucer on the small tea table next to her, then stood up and said, "Therefore, I will not prohibit you from carrying out your businesses. Of course, those who are participating in the businesses that I have prohibited should no longer be alive to sit here." Hood's joke did not liven up the atmosphere at all, but instead made the guys sitting on the sofa in the room tremble even more. Because they had personally witnessed yesterday how these two young women, who came from who knows where, had killed those scumbag bosses in the beginning. Hood and the others were just assassinating one den after another, but after clearing out 2 or 3 dens, the others immediately armed themselves to face these two intruders. Because of the huge changes in Eastern Europe during this era, many people who had received professional training in those countries fled to this place, bringing with them some weapons with considerable firepower originally, relying on their training and the powerful firepower that had never appeared in this area before. These ruthless guys had successfully seized a large market from the original locals. And they didn't care about rules or bottom lines for the sake of money originally, according to the course of history. This group of ruthless guys could have completely subverted the British underworld by relying on their lack of principles, making a lot of money, and being powerful enough, turning this place into a living hell. But now, all of this has been completely changed by the two ship girls faced with those ship girls who could directly deflect even the direct shots of large caliber rifles with their skin. These guys were undoubtedly completely annihilated, and the reason why these people were trembling so badly now was because Hood and her companions had staged a scene reminiscent of hand-tearing Japanese devils from some anti-Japanese dramas on the spot in order to warn these guys who had a bit of a bottom line. Now it seems that, for these not-so-good guys, the approach of sending church members to convert them was far less effective than performing a classic scene from an anti-Japanese drama. Only after re-establishing the rules for this group of people and sending them away, Veneto, who had been arranged to organize the group of rescued innocents, walked into the room, holding a letter in her hand that was completely out of tune with this era, sealed in a parchment envelope. Chapter 12 Hogwarts Letter. Just as Veneto received that magical letter, Hugo and Hermione were having breakfast at the dining table at home. As compensation for the meager dinner the two children had the previous night, Mrs. Granger had prepared a lavish English breakfast this morning. The aroma of grilled bacon, fried eggs, and baked beans filled the table, stimulating Hugo's appetite after a busy night. However, just as he was heartily enjoying his mother's loving breakfast, Mr. Granger walked in from outside the door with a frown. Besides the Subscribe the Times and several bills in his hand, there were also two strange-looking letters at the bottom of the pile. "I'm not sure if this is a prank or what," Mr. Granger said as he sat down on the chair. He first put the other letters on the small tea table next to him, then placed the two strange-looking letters on the table. "I found these in the mailbox. They look a bit odd, and if it's a prank, the cost is too high." At this moment, Hugo noticed that the envelopes of both letters were made of thick parchment, and the addresses were written in emerald green ink. There were no stamps. One was addressed to Hermione, and the other to himself. Turning over the envelopes, he found a wax seal on the back, with a shield-shaped coat of arms. Around the capital letter H on the coat of arms were a lion, an eagle, a badger, and a snake. "Am I also a wizard?" the thought echoed in Hugo's mind the moment he saw the specifics of the letter. After all, he had never experienced any magical surges in his previous memories, which had led him to believe that he was just an ordinary person without magic. Therefore, after learning last night that summoning a ship girl required changing the original plot, Hugo had been searching for ways to alter the plot without being a wizard. Unfortunately, one night wasn't enough for him to come up with any good ideas. But he didn't expect that he and Hermione would receive Hogwarts Owl Post together. "I think it's probably because of our existence that you didn't have a magical surge before," Victory explained from upstairs, sensing Hugo's strong sense of confusion. After all, when two mysterious forces coexist in one person's body, all sorts of strange phenomena can occur. Due to these two strange letters, everyone quickly finished the breakfast in front of them. Then, the four of them sat around the round table in the living room and began to study the letters. Mr. Granger first opened the two envelopes and took out the letters. After handing one of them to Mrs. Granger, the two of them started reading, while Hugo and Hermione nervously stared at their parents, because they had seen the names on the envelopes and knew that the letters were related to them. "I think this is very much like a clever prank," Mrs. Granger said after putting down the letter a few minutes later, hesitating for a moment before speaking to Hugo and his sister. "For example, when I was young, I received an invitation from the Tooth Fairy, but it was actually just an excuse for your father to invite me for a walk in the park. That was a rather foolish excuse, but thankfully you responded to me," Mr. Granger said, looking at his wife with affectionate eyes. For a moment, Hugo felt like he was being force-fed dog food. Perhaps noticing Hugo and Hermione's expressions, Mr. Granger coughed softly and resumed his upright posture, saying, "Your mother and I share the same view. We think this should be a prank." However, before he could finish his sentence, they heard a rhythmic tapping on the glass. Then, the four people in the living room saw a gray and white owl pecking at the glass of the living room window with its beak. "It seems Hogwarts also understands cost management," Hugo thought in his mind as he looked at the owl, which was a whole circle fatter than a chicken raised for a year or two. "At least they know to use one owl to deliver letters to two people living in the same place, instead of finding two owls to deliver two letters separately." Just as he was thinking about this, Mr. Granger stood up and opened the window. As a result, he saw that this owl didn't run away like common wild animals when it saw people, but directly flapped its wings and fluttered to the table in the living room, then stood proudly next to the two letters. "What's wrong with it? Is it injured?" Mrs. Granger asked Mr. Granger in a slightly surprised tone as she looked at the owl that had voluntarily flown into the room. "Why did it fly into our house? I think this may be related to the two letters we received earlier." Mr. Granger's voice sounded a bit distorted, because he had never seen such a magical thing. "I remember the end of those two letters said something like this: 'We will await your owl's reply before July 31st. So, it delivered these two letters." Hearing Mr. Granger's answer, Mrs. Granger widened her eyes and pointed at the owl, which was leisurely preening the feathers on its wings with its beak on the table. "Who do you think trained them?" "I'm not sure either," Mr. Granger said, shrugging his shoulders as he walked to the table and stared at the owl. "But I'm starting to believe that what's written in the letter is true. After all, it's very difficult to train wild animals like owls to be like this. So, there really is a magical school called Hogwarts that has sent invitations to our children." "This is just too magical," Mrs. Granger said in a raised tone, startling the owl that was just grooming its feathers. causing it to jump to the side. That can't be determined yet, Mr. Granger said, shaking his head. After all, if it's just training such an owl to deliver letters, it's not impossible, so I don't think we can determine. Chris, can you tell me what your final conclusion is? Mrs. Granger sounded a bit angry after hearing her husband's ambiguous words. For the sake of the children, I think we must come to a conclusion about this matter. We can write a letter and write our questions on it, then give it to the owl. Then, let's see if it can deliver the letter for us as the letter says. After being yelled at by Mrs. Granger, Mr. Granger immediately came up with a seemingly feasible method. Then what next? What if there really is a magic school? Mrs. Granger asked. Are we going to let our children go to that strange school to learn magic? I think we should, Mr. Granger said, making up his mind after thinking for a few minutes. Maybe wizards are like mutants in X-Men, possessing some magical powers. If they don't learn, they may cause some harm to themselves and the people around them. The first X-Men comic appeared in 1963, when Mr. Granger was young and very obsessed with these comics. Therefore, when considering the issue, he naturally thought of the content of the comic and influenced his decision. Chapter 13 Visiting Professor. After some discussion and persuasion, at noon, the owl, which had been well treated with raw meat and milk by Mrs. Granger, took off from the Granger's house with a letter, and then fluttered its wings and flew north. By evening, the owl reappeared on the windowsill where it had been in the morning, pecking at the glass. After Mrs. Granger opened the window, the owl handed her a tightly rolled parchment scroll with its claws and then fluttered its wings and flew away. Dear, what was that just now? Mr. Granger asked, looking at Mrs. Granger as she walked into the living room with an unfolded parchment scroll in her hand. I thought I heard something knocking on the window, because the owl from noon today brought us a reply, Mrs. Granger said, under the curious gazes of the three people in the living room. This Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry says they will send someone over the day after tomorrow to explain everything clearly to us. Great. Hugo and Hermione, who had been playing chess on the side, jumped up excitedly. Hugo was excited because he could now enter Hogwarts to change the plot and accumulate destiny points, and then summon all his ship girls one by one. Hermione was excited because, for a child her age, going to a top public school and then a top university after the holidays, and then living a life not much different from her parents, a situation where she could see decades into the future, was less appealing than going to magic school to learn magic. As for why the school would send someone, it was easy to understand. After all, every year there are Muggle-born wizards attending Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, so Hugo thought this home visit was likely a standard procedure for Hogwarts. After all, Hogwarts also knows that as a magic school hidden in the magical world, if they want to allow those ordinary parents who know nothing about the magical world to let their children go to such a school to learn magic, the school must do something to make those parents realize that magic is real, not some kind of joke. Therefore, on the morning of the third day, the entire Granger family finished breakfast early and waited in the living room, dressed in formal clothes. At 5 minutes to 9 in the morning, there was a knock on the door. It seems they are quite punctual. Hearing the knock, Mr. Granger immediately put down his newspaper and stood up, then walked to the door to open it for the knocker. As a doctor, he naturally had a good impression of people who could keep time. Madam, may I ask who you are? After opening the door, Mr. Granger saw an elderly woman in an old-fashioned black robe standing at the door. Hello, I am Professor McGonagall from Hogwarts. Are you Mr. Granger? Professor McGonagall said politely, looking at Mr. Granger, who opened the door. Yes, we received the owl's letter earlier. Mr. Granger nodded, opened the door wider, and gestured for her to enter. Please come in, Professor McGonagall. It's not appropriate to talk at the door. When the two of them arrived in the living room, they found that Hugo and Hermione had already prepared tea and snacks. After sitting on the sofa, Professor McGonagall looked at the two adults and said, I am here today to discuss matters concerning your children's future education with you. So, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry really exists, doesn't it? After exchanging a glance, Mr. Granger asked Professor McGonagall, who was sitting across the coffee table. But magic exists, it's just that the entire magical world is hidden, so you Muggles didn't know of our existence before, Professor McGonagall explained patiently. As a professor who has worked at the school for many years, she has seen Mr. Granger's situation more than once or twice, so she is very experienced. After saying these words, Professor McGonagall took out her wand and tapped a teacup on the table, which immediately turned into a beautiful little bird. The little bird flew around the living room singing, then landed back on the coffee table and turned back into the teacup filled with black tea. Magic is indeed amazing, Mrs. Granger said after seeing this scene. I also know that since my children have this talent for magic, it is acceptable for them to receive professional training. But if I may be so bold, can you tell us what our children can do after graduating from the school, madam? Please forgive us parents for being worried about our children's future prospects, Mr. Granger said at this time. My 2 children have now received admission offers from the top public schools in the UK. If nothing unexpected happens, they will have a bright future. So I hope you can give me a reason to let my children give up all of this. No one can guarantee what the future will be like. Professor McGonagall pursed her lips and said with a serious face, but I can tell you that everything I just did is just a simple application of magic. There are many more things that magic can do. After briefly introducing the content about magical power, Professor McGonagall changed the subject to the content about the future of their children that Mr. and Mrs. Granger are most concerned about. Wizards in this world, like you muggles who don't understand magic, have their own society, and don't hide alone in the jungle like in your fairy tales. So it's not impossible to find a good job after graduating from us. Speaking of this, Professor McGonagall showed a proud look. And Hogwarts, which sent invitations to your children, is an ancient school with a history of nearly 1,000 years, and also one of the 3 best magic schools in Europe. Every student who successfully graduates from Hogwarts can find a decent job in the magical world. That is to say, there are not only 3 magic schools in Europe. I remember the information said that there seems to be one in Russia. Hugo thought divergently after hearing this sentence, but thinking about it, this is also very normal. The 3 schools that appeared in the original book should not be able to cover the entire Europe in theory. Besides, the magical world pays attention to a long history. It is not surprising that countries in Eastern and Southern Europe such as Greece, which have their own unique culture and sufficient history, have their own magic schools. Just as Hugo was thinking about those things about magic schools, Professor McGonagall was describing to Mr. and Mrs. Granger what kind of life students who graduated from Hogwarts would have. But the kind of work that the professor described was easy, with winter and summer vacations, and even a lot of time and money to conduct magical research. How did it sound like a portrayal of Professor McGonagall's own life? If that's the case, I think I roughly understand what your magical world is all about. Mr. Granger nodded and said, please allow our family to discuss a few words, and we can give you an answer in up to 5 minutes. Chapter 14 Enter the Leaky Cauldron. After the Granger family greeted Professor McGonagall, the 4 of them left the living room and went to the dining room next door. As soon as they sat down, Mr. Granger looked at Hugo and Hermione and asked, do you want to go to this magic school now? Yes, Hugo and Hermione said in unison. Then Hugo added, at least I think for us, it would be a waste to let such an ability go unused. Then what about your future? Mrs. Granger asked nervously. Although listening to that professor's description, the magical world also has its own excellent side. But if you enter that magical world, it will be difficult for us to provide you with any help. Everything will only depend on your own efforts. Don't think that European parents don't care about their children. In Hugo's previous life, there were news reports of some European and American celebrity parents bribing to get their children into prestigious schools. Think about the recommendation letter system, which is very important in Western universities. All of these can show that parents everywhere are very concerned about their children's future and will use their abilities to pave the way for their children as much as possible. I believe that since we can achieve such success in learning now, then even if we go to learn magic in the future, we can learn to the top level. Hermione proudly raised her head and said, so Mom, you don't have to worry about these things for us. If that's the case, Mr. Granger tapped the table slowly with his fingers for dozens of seconds before making a decision. He first exchanged a glance with Mrs. Granger, and then looked at his 2 children and said, if you really decide, then go to that school to learn magic. Great. Hugo and Hermione cheered happily after hearing their father's permission for them to go to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Then they followed their parents back to the living room. Professor McGonagall was drinking tea at this time. Seeing Hugo and the others enter, she put down her teacup and looked at Hugo and them and said, have you discussed it so quickly? Of course, Professor McGonagall. Mr. Granger nodded and greeted her before asking, if we don't want to go to magic school, what would you do? After all, I think you have existed for such a long time, and we have never heard of your existence, so there should be some way to keep your secret. If that's the case, we will send specialized personnel to eliminate all your memories of me and the magical world. Professor McGonagall said with a serious face. "But please rest assured that under the handling of professional staff, this behavior will not cause you any harm other than losing this part of your memory. I don't think we need to trouble those professionals," Mrs. Granger said at this time, "because we agree with our children's idea of letting them go to your Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. If that's the case, that would be great." Professor McGonagall smiled. After all, for them, it is very important to let every young wizard, especially those from Muggle families, go to school to learn magic, because this can minimize the possibility of the magical world being exposed, not to mention that suppressing magic for a long time is likely to create obscurials, such terrible things. So in order to avoid this terrible ending, every teacher will try their best to persuade those Muggle parents to send their children to learn magic. So when she heard that Hugo and Hermione would go to learn magic, Professor McGonagall showed a gratified smile, and then introduced some precautions to them, especially the location of the Leaky Cauldron and the 9 and 3/4 platform, and handed the tickets to Hugo and them and said, "Then, Mr. Granger, Miss Granger, see you at Hogwarts on September 1st. After saying that, Professor McGonagall said goodbye to the Granger family and left the Granger's house. Originally, the Granger family wanted to see Professor McGonagall off, but what they didn't expect was that Professor McGonagall disappeared after turning half a circle in the hall. "Magic is indeed convenient enough," Mr. Granger said with emotion after seeing this scene. He probably guessed that Professor McGonagall used some kind of magic teleportation to leave here. "By the way, just now that Professor McGonagall seemed to say that you are going to a place called Diagon Alley to buy your necessities. I think we will have time tomorrow to accompany you there to purchase the things you need for school." After returning to his room, Hugo began to contact Hood and Veneto through the Admiral network. Then he learned what these two ship girls had done in less than 24 hours. "You are really?" Hugo opened his eyes wide in surprise at the ship girl's ability to cause trouble, but he interrupted Hood when she apologized. "There is nothing wrong with what you did, just clean up the scene. I believe you can do it, that's for sure." Veneto's arrogant voice came from the Admiral network. "The fear we left in the hearts of those people is enough for them to keep these secrets for us. If you are sure, then there is no problem," Hugo said finally. As for the ship girls who can read people's hearts, he believes that their judgments should not be a big problem. "By the way, I received a letter from Hogwarts today." At the end of the call, Hugo said, "Tomorrow our family will go to Diagon Alley to purchase the things needed for school." Veneto also received that letter. It was sent by Professor Flitwick, through the Admiral network. The ship girls naturally knew the story about this world from Hugo, so they could recognize the identity of the professor who came to explain it the first time. If that's the case, that's just great. From the perspective of causing trouble alone, it would definitely be a good thing for Hugo's plan to have a ship girl enter Hogwarts, not to mention that after becoming an admiral, he found that there was a special closeness between himself and the ship girls, and he hoped to be with them. "Then I'll see you tomorrow." The next morning, the entire Granger family walked out of their respective bedrooms with dark circles under their eyes. Thinking about it, it is also true that everyone was exposed to magic, something that completely broke people's free views, so it is normal to not be able to sleep at night. Even Hugo, who knew about the existence of this world in advance, was no exception. After all, this is magic. The Leaky Cauldron. The Leaky Cauldron. After everyone hurriedly finished breakfast and drove to Charing Cross Road in central London, Mr. Granger, who was walking in the front, stared at the narrow partition wall between a large bookstore and a record store for a long time, then turned around and asked, "Are you sure this is the place?" "No problem. This is the place, we'll pull you over." Hugo nodded to confirm. Then he and Hermione pulled their parents forward according to what Professor McGonagall had told them yesterday. In his vision, he could clearly see a dirty and narrow bar squeezed between the bookstore and the record store. In this way, the Granger family of four smoothly entered the entrance to the magical world, the Leaky Cauldron. And behind them, the ordinary people walking on the street did not notice at all that the four people had disappeared from the street. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 15, Diagon Alley. Darkness, filth. That was Hugo's first impression upon entering the Leaky Cauldron. As the facade of the wizarding world, Hugo had thought the Leaky Cauldron described in the novels was merely an exaggeration. But now, walking into this famous pub, He realized that the novel, perhaps due to being children's literature, had greatly understated how terrible the place was. Whether it was the tables, stools, bar, or floor in the room, everything was covered in a layer of dirty grime. Although it wasn't very thick, it was visible even in the dim light of the room. It feels like these places haven't been cleaned for hundreds of years, Mr. Granger said to Hugo, lowering his head. I feel like I have to peel my shoes off the floor with every step. I don't know how these wizards can tolerate this environment. By this time, Hugo had adapted to the dim light. He saw several witches wearing pointed hats sitting at a table illuminated by sunlight streaming through the window, drinking some kind of alcoholic beverage, surrounded by large and small packages. They seemed to have just finished shopping and were enjoying a drink. In another dark corner, two hooded figures seemed to be whispering something suspiciously. The only saving grace was that both the clothes of the bar owner and the glass he was wiping looked very clean. The bottles in the cabinet behind him were also polished, which finally made the bar seem somewhat worthy of its name. After seeing Hugo and his family of four enter, the customers in the bar merely glanced at them before continuing their own affairs. Only the owner looked up, sized them up for a moment, then put down his glass and looked at Hugo and Hermione, saying, "Are you both first-year students at Hogwarts this year?" "Yes, my sister and I are," Hugo said, stepping forward. "According to Professor McGonagall's instructions the day before yesterday, we and our parents came here to buy some things needed for school." Tom, the owner of the Leaky Cauldron, merely glanced at Hugo's parents before continuing to focus on Hugo and Hermione. "So, you want to go to Diagon Alley, right? Please follow me." "Thank you, sir." As a dentist who had to deal with people all day, Mr. Granger could naturally tell that the bar owner was somewhat ignoring him and his wife. However, out of politeness, he still thanked the owner for putting aside his business to lead the children. Following the owner Tom, the Granger family of four passed through the bar and came to a small courtyard behind the bar, surrounded by walls on all sides. Besides a trash can and some weeds, there was nothing else here. Tom then walked to the wall and pulled out his wand, counting the bricks on the wall as he said, "Remember, 3 bricks up from the trash can, and then 2 bricks across." After speaking, he lightly tapped the brick he had just pointed out 3 times with his wand. Then, amidst the dull sound of the bricks moving, he turned back to look at Hugo and Hermione. "Then use your wands to tap this brick 3 times, and then you can open the passage to Diagon Alley. After you have your own wands, you will need to do these things yourselves, so don't forget. Finally, I wish you all the best in Diagon Alley." "Thank you," Hugo said politely, then watched as the magical street gradually appeared in his sight. Just then, he suddenly thought of something he hadn't understood when he read the novel before. "Then how do we get back later?" "Just tap the same brick 3 times with your wand," Tom said, turning around as he returned to his bar. "So, the first thing you should do when you enter Diagon Alley is to buy your own wands. By the way, you should know that your muggle money won't work here, right?" "Yes, Professor McGonagall mentioned it when she came. She told us to go to Gringotts as soon as possible to exchange the money we have for the metal coins used in the wizarding world." "That's good. Professor McGonagall has always been so meticulous," Tom said as he walked towards the bar, "unlike Professor Trelawney, who teaches divination, who is always forgetful and leaves out some things." After crossing the doorway, a magical street appeared before the family of 4, a cobblestone road stretched forward, and on both sides of the street were all kinds of magical shops. Some of the shops selling food had even set up parasols directly on the side of the street, and many wizards sat under those parasols, eating and chatting. What a street with a long history. Looking at the magical scenery in front of him, Mr. Granger held back for a long time, and only managed to say this sentence after the passage behind him turned back into a wall. After all, if you excluded the magical elements of the street, such as the blue rabbit fireworks that could explode in the air during the day and jump around, the overall feeling was ancient and old. After all, with magical maintenance, those buildings with hundreds or thousands of years of history could easily be preserved to this day. Fortunately, even in England, there were quaint tourist towns similar to Weshen, which Hugo had visited in his previous life, so after the initial shock, the family quickly calmed down and began to look at the shops on the street. The closest shop to the passage was a shop selling various cauldrons. The dazzling sunlight shone on a stack of pots outside the shop. A sign hung above the pots, which read, "Copper, brass, tin, silver cauldrons, complete models, automatic stirring, foldable." "I remember that your list requires you to buy a cauldron," Mrs. Granger said, taking out a piece of parchment from her handbag and looking at it. then putting the parchment back into her handbag. But before buying everything, I think we should go to the bank to exchange the wizarding money first. On the way, the Grangers felt that their impression of the magical world had improved a lot. After all, in this era, televisions were all bulky things with huge picture tubes in the back, so posters that were as thin as a piece of paper and could display moving images on the wall seemed very interesting to the two parents. Soon, they passed through the crowd of wizards and various strange shops on the street and came to a snow-white building that towered above the surrounding shops. Beside the shiny bronze door stood a small figure wearing a scarlet and gold-trimmed uniform. They should be the legendary goblins. Ignoring the gatekeeper's indifference, the Granger family passed through the bronze door. Along the way, Hugo kept thinking about a question, which was why the translator translated the word goblin into Yaojing, meaning goblin or elf in Chinese, when he read the translated version of the novel. Clearly, the appearance of the two creatures was worlds apart. After entering, a young-looking goblin came over, bowed to them, and led them into a tall marble hall. In the hall, about 100 goblins sat on high stools behind a row of long counters, some weighing coins with copper scales, some examining gems with eyepieces, while hastily registering in large ledgers. There were countless doors in the hall, leading to different places, and many goblins guided people in and out of these doors. Chapter 16 Ollivander's One Shop. The goblin leading the way went directly along the path to the right side of the hall, then guided the Granger family to a counter with a fence before leaving. Before them, a woman in fashionable Muggle clothing was leaving with a curly-haired boy. "Hello, we need to exchange some pounds." Seeing that the counter was now empty, Mr. Granger took a few steps forward and said to the counter, "Because my children are going to Hogwarts, so." "Understood." Mr. Granger hadn't finished speaking when the goblin sitting behind the counter pushed up the glasses on his nose and looked at him, saying, "Please state the names of the new students now. We need to confirm." Hermione Granger and Hugo Granger. After the goblin read out the names of the two children, Mr. Granger asked, "May I ask why you need to check the list to exchange currency? Are there any restrictions on the exchange?" "Of course, there are restrictions. After all, your Muggle money isn't very useful to us. So, according to the regulations, each wizard can only exchange a maximum of 150 galleons for pounds. Of course, if your family has new students, this limit will be increased to 200 galleons, the goblin said while checking the list in his hand, then pointed his finger at a certain position on the parchment scroll in his hand. "Found them, Hermione Granger and Hugo Granger," the goblin said, raising his head. "You are their guardian, right? Today, you can exchange a total of 400 galleons for your children, which is 2,000 pounds. Okay." Considering that the bank didn't extend to the magical world, Mr. Granger had withdrawn a lot of cash from the bank last night and carried it with him, which came in handy at this moment. After counting the stack of banknotes handed over by Mr. Granger, the goblin took out two small leather pouches that had been prepared in advance from under the counter. After taking the pouch and opening it, Mr. Granger saw that the pouch contained some golden coins the size of beer bottle caps. "Is this a gold coin?" Mr. Granger asked curiously, taking out a gold galleon and weighing it in his palm. "It doesn't feel as heavy as pure gold." "Don't use your Muggle thinking to guess the power of us goblins." These goblins' ears were much more sensitive than imagined, so after hearing Mr. Granger's words, he immediately retorted excitedly, "The most valuable thing about these real gold galleons is the magical power we attach to them, not the gold itself." "Sorry, because I didn't know this before." Looking at the excited goblin in front of him, Mr. Granger quickly apologized. After confirming Mr. Granger's Muggle identity, the goblin quickly calmed down, then waved his hand to signal them to leave, muttering at the same time, "Oh, these Muggles." Fortunately, after walking out of the Gringotts Gate, the sunlight on the street cheered everyone up a lot, and also forgot the unpleasantness of withdrawing money just now. "Where should we go next?" Hermione asked first. "I remember that the first item on that list is to buy 3 sets of plain black work robes, so shall we go to the clothing store first?" "No." Mr. Granger shook his head and said, "Don't forget that the owner of the pub just emphasized the importance of wands, so I think the first thing we should buy is wands." After discussing the plan, everyone, led by Mr. Granger, walked towards the depths of the alley, because in their memory, none of the shops they had just passed by sold wands. Because Diagon Alley was not very long, they quickly walked through the entire commercial street, then walked back a little and came to the entrance of the only wand shop on the entire street. This shop was old and dilapidated, and the gold lettering on the door had peeled off, which read, "Ollivanders, makers of fine wands since 382 BC." In the dusty shop window, A lone wand lay on a faded purple cushion. "Look, this is the downside of monopolies," Mr. Granger said, standing at the door of the shop. "After all, wizards have magic, but they are still human and like clean and tidy environments. So, although the other shops on this street are not large, most of them are clean and tidy, but as a necessity for wizards, this is the only place on the whole street that sells them. I think that's why the owner here lets his shop become so dirty and messy." "Okay, you're probably right. But now the children should go buy their wands, not listen to your long lectures here." Seeing that Mr. Granger wanted to say something more, Mrs. Granger immediately interrupted him, walked up the steps, and pushed open the door. Seeing this, Mr. Granger could only shake his head and lead the children into the wand shop. "Good morning, madam, gentlemen." Just as Hugo and the others walked into the shop, a soft voice came from behind a pile of wand boxes. Then an old man with silvery white eyes walked out of the darkness of the room and looked down at Hugo and Hermione. "Well, which of you two are new to Hogwarts this year?" Ollivander asked, lowering his head. "Only wizards can use wands, and muggles can't use that mysterious power at all." "We both are, sir," Hugo said. At the same time, Mrs. Granger took out 2 identical Hogwarts acceptance letters from her handbag to prove that her children were telling the truth. A pair of twin siblings from a muggle family both become wizards. Yes, I should have known." Perhaps because Hugo spoke first, Ollivander mistakenly thought he was the older brother in the family. "I think I should have one suitable for you here." "Should have known? But you didn't even figure out who's older," Hugo complained in his heart when Ollivander turned around and took a ruler from the shelf to measure Hermione's body data. However, considering the importance of wands to wizards in this world, it should be very beneficial to Ollivander's business as a master wand maker to act mysteriously. After measuring the data of the 2 people, Ollivander quickly turned around and walked to the pile of boxes behind him and rummaged through them. A few minutes later, he walked over from the back of the room holding a dozen boxes. "I think there should be wands suitable for you here," he said, opening a box and handing the wand inside to Hermione. "Try this one, 10 inches, made of olive wood and unicorn tail hair." Trying wands is a very boring thing, even for Hugo. This should be a very important thing. But repeating the action of picking up a small wooden stick and waving it is still very boring if it lasts for more than 5 minutes. Fortunately, when he tried the 16th wand, he finally found the one that suited him. Chapter 17 Big Purchase. The one that Hugo chose, or according to Ollivander, he was chosen by a 12-inch silver lime wand with a dragon heartstring core. Silver lime? I seem to remember that this type of wand is suitable for seers or wizards skilled in legilimency. After learning about the material of the wand in his hand, Hugo recalled the information he had seen in his previous life. But that makes sense. After all, in this world, I can be considered a seer. Hermione's wand was an 11.5-inch walnut wand, also with a dragon heartstring core. After both of them had successfully chosen their wands, Hugo heard a victorious voice in his mind. "What did you just do? I noticed that your fate points, which were previously reset to 0, now have 1 more point. Maybe it's because we both chose our wands just now," Hugo said. "Originally, my sister's wand should have been made of vine wood, but now it's walnut. And for wizards, wands are an indispensable item. So I think this should be the reason why I suddenly gained a fate point." "You have a point," Victory said, sounding a little dejected. "It's a pity I couldn't stay by your side, otherwise, I might have found more opportunities to gain fate points, because it wasn't easy for Hood to reorganize the group of illegal immigrants in the Whitechapel area." Victory had been staying with Hood for the past few days to help her deal with those chores, so she didn't come shopping. After all, according to her idea, things that weren't written in the novels shouldn't cause any fluctuations in fate. "It's okay, I'm going to Hogwarts soon, there will be plenty of opportunities to gain fate points," Hugo quickly comforted her after hearing Victory's dejected words. "And next, I don't think buying clothes or dry pot will affect fate." "You're right," Victory replied after thinking for a moment after hearing Hugo's comfort. "After all, the most important thing for ordinary wizards in this world is the wand. And other things of the Deathly Hallows level shouldn't be something you guys can encounter." After ending the conversation with Victory, Hugo noticed that Ollivander had already collected the 15 galleons and 6 sickles for the wands from Hugo's parents. Then he handed the 2 boxes containing the wands to Hugo and his sister. Obviously, as an essential item for wizards, averaging just over 7 galleons per person is a significantly cheaper price. Hugo suspected that there should be a subsidy from the Ministry of Magic as one of the benefits of the wizarding world, Walnut often chooses the most intelligent wizards first, while Silver Lime represents a tendency towards a certain mysterious nature. According to wizarding legends, the holders of Silver Lime wands often enjoy a very high status. While handing out the boxes, Ollivander introduced the characteristics of these wands to Hugo and his sister, and the dragon heartstring core is often considered to make the wand more powerful, and the spells cast are more gorgeous. But on the other hand, the loyalty of this type of wand is the worst, and it is also easy to turn to dark magic. So children, you must guard the bottom line of your hearts when learning magic. After listening to the wand master's warning, the Granger family left the wand shop and began to purchase all the necessary items for school on the street. According to the shopping list attached to the notice, they patronized bookstores, pharmacies, cauldron shops, and a series of other shops. When they passed a Quidditch supplies shop, Hermione didn't show any interest in the Nimbus 2000 in the window, but Mr. Granger ran back to the entrance of the Quidditch supplies shop and stared at that broom for a long time after buying the cauldron, the necessary suitcase, and the specified potions while waiting for the two ladies. I think flying in the sky on a broom must be more exciting than a Harley motorcycle. After seeing his mother and Hermione walking out of the bookstore with a thick stack of books, Hugo pulled his father, who seemed a little reluctant to leave, away from the window and reunited with his mother and sister. As a result, on the way, Mr. Granger first babbled about the various specifications of the broom, and then talked about the high horsepower motorcycle he had ridden when he was young. Hugo expressed his understanding of his father's behavior. After all, the pursuit of speed is imprinted in the bones of many people. It has nothing to do with whether they master magic, age, or gender. Why did you buy so many books? Mr. Granger asked, feeling a little strange after reuniting with the two ladies. I don't remember there being so many books on that list, because Hermione bought some extra books. Her quota is now basically spent on these books, except for leaving money to buy various necessities, and Mrs. Granger said, shaking her head with a smile as she looked at her daughter. And she still has several books she hasn't bought yet. My quota can be given to my sister. As long as she is willing to share the books with me, then half of the money for the books can be considered mine, Hugo volunteered after hearing his mother's words. After all, in his impression, Hermione has always been a person who loves reading and learning. Whether it was the one he read about in the novel in his previous life or the one in his impression in this life. This is why she is able to achieve a high level of learning despite only having ordinary level intelligence. Therefore, Hugo quite agrees with his sister's taste in books, and getting to know a strange world through books that record the knowledge of this world is a very good way, so Hugo is willing to share the money for buying books with his sister to share these new books. Very good, Mrs. Granger nodded with a smile after hearing Hugo's words. She was very happy that her children could maintain a good sibling relationship, and then counted out a portion of money from her pocket and handed it to Hermione. You can now buy the books you just liked but didn't buy. Because this time it was buying the books she had already liked. Hermione only spent 5 or 6 minutes walking out with 7 or 8 books, and then put them in the 2 suitcases that Hugo and Mr. Granger had just bought that had space extension charms on them because the sun had already slowly risen at this time. The Granger family, who had been shopping for more than an hour and felt thirsty, sat under a large umbrella on the side of the road after buying a frozen ice cream ball that could float in the air for each person, eating while looking at the shopping list. We only have clothes and pets left to buy now, Mr. Granger said, looking at the list. You said you didn't want to buy pets for the time being, so we'll go buy clothes directly after we finish these ice creams. Where should we go to buy them? I seem to see 2 places selling clothes along the way, Mrs. Granger said. Let's go to the shop called Madame Malkin's Robes for All Occasions. Mr. Granger thought for a moment and said, our family isn't going to buy those second-hand clothes, and when I passed the entrance of Twilfit and Taddings just now, I saw a customer inside looking at me with very unfriendly eyes. I suspect that's where those racialists among the wizards are concentrated. Chapter 18 Meeting with Veneto. Are you here to buy Hogwarts school uniforms, dear? Just as the Granger family entered Madame Malkin's Robes for All Occasions, a short, plump witch dressed in purple approached them before the Grangers could say anything. The witch proactively introduced, we have all kinds of robes here, and many people buy them. There's a young person trying on clothes inside right now. At the back of the shop, a young girl with short, silver-white hair was standing on a footstool, while a witch used a self-operating tape measure to take her body measurements, muttering under her breath, when you young people buy clothes, you should always buy them a little bigger, because you grow very fast. So you need to leave room for growth in many places. Of course, The witch didn't notice that the girl she was measuring was looking at her with an extremely depressed and resentful expression. "Alright, hurry up, which of you two is next?" After confirming that Hugo and Hermione were both first-year students this year, Madame Malkin said briskly, "Ladies first, please." Hugo gestured, and Hermione followed Madame Malkin to the back of the shop, where she was instructed to stand on another footstool next to the silver-haired girl. Then, she was draped in a robe, and pins were used to mark the appropriate length for her. "Are you also a first year at Hogwarts this year?" Seeing Hermione standing next to her, the girl asked directly. "Yes." Hermione first raised her arms as Madame Malkin requested, to facilitate the measurement of her arm length, then turned her head slightly to speak to the young girl next to her. "That's great, then we should be classmates in the same year," the girl said. "Let me introduce myself first. My name is Veneto, Vittorio Veneto. To be honest, before receiving this letter, I didn't think there was such a magical thing as magic in the world." This girl was Veneto, the ship girl summoned by Hugo before, and her being here now was not a chance encounter, but a carefully crafted meeting by Veneto and Hood. After all, if she wanted to stay with Hugo smoothly after entering the school, then it was very important to have an encounter before entering the school. Although this name, which was originally a place name, seemed a bit strange as a girl's name, because Europeans didn't have any fixed rules for naming anyway, Hermione only felt that this girl was a bit special and didn't think too much about other possibilities. "Did you come alone?" After chatting for a few words, Hermione looked at the lonely Veneto and asked, because from her clothes and what she had just said, Hermione could tell that she, like herself, came from an ordinary family, and she found it hard to imagine that an 11-year-old girl would come to such a completely unfamiliar place for the first time without her family accompanying her. "Yes, I'm alone," Veneto smiled and said. "After all, I only have one older sister in this world, and she has some important things to deal with recently, so she can't accompany me to buy things, so I can only come alone." "Ah, I'm very sorry." After hearing Veneto's words, Hermione immediately apologized sincerely. "I didn't know about these things." "It's nothing, I haven't seen my parents since I was born, so I'm used to it." Veneto waved her hand casually. This kind of freedom was from the heart, because as a ship girl whose predecessor was a warship, Veneto simply didn't have, and couldn't possibly have, parents. But seeing this scene, Hermione felt even more guilty. "It's ready, dear." At this time, Madame Malkin's words saved Hermione, who was a little embarrassed by the rash question just now. She quickly jumped off the stool, then greeted Veneto and ran back to her parents' side. Then, "See you at Hogwarts." When Hugo stepped onto the stool to start getting measured, Veneto had just finished buying her clothes, so after exchanging glances with Hugo, she took the clothes she bought and put them in her suitcase, then dragged the suitcase out of the room. When she left the room, she also greeted Hermione. "That child is so pitiful." After Hugo went to get measured, Hermione had already walked to her mother's side and talked about her conversation with Veneto just now. After learning about Veneto's situation and that she, like Hugo and them, was a new student and would be enrolling this year, Mrs. Granger's maternal instincts exploded, and she said, "If you meet her at school, help her if you can." By the time they finished shopping, it was already noon. After raising his hand and looking at the hands on his watch, Mr. Granger thought it would be better to just have lunch in Diagon Alley before going back. As a result, when they came to a small pub on the roadside that also sold simple meals, they found that it was lunchtime and all the tables were full of people. "It seems we can only eat outside," Mr. Granger said with some disappointment, because he was curious about what kind of food wizards who could cast magic ate compared to ordinary people. After all, if you just looked at it with the naked eye, he felt that the food was no different from what he usually ate. However, both novels and movies showed that the food wizards usually ate was not much different from ordinary people. On the contrary, those snacks looked completely different from what ordinary people ate and were more representative. So Mr. Granger wouldn't have much regret if he didn't eat here this time. For Hugo, this trip to Diagon Alley could be considered a very rewarding trip. The only regret was that perhaps because he came at an inappropriate time, he didn't encounter any classmates mentioned in the novels other than Hermione when they reopened the passage and passed through the leaky cauldron to the street belonging to ordinary people. They happened to see the girl Veneto they had seen when buying clothes sitting at a small table outside a roadside restaurant eating, and across from her sat a young woman with long golden hair and blue eyes. "Good afternoon, Miss Granger." Seeing Hermione come out, Veneto waved desperately at Hermione. This also made the Granger family decisively sit down at the edge of that big table. "This is my sister Hood, Victoria Hood," Veneto introduced. In order to live among ordinary people, the ship girls often gave themselves names that looked a little more normal, with both a first and last name. However, They were often more arbitrary when naming themselves, as long as they embedded their ship name in their name. As for whether the ship name was in their last name or first name, it didn't matter at all. Hearing the two sisters' obviously different surnames, the Granger family, except for Hugo, immediately imagined many stories about them. If they were all written out, it would be enough to make at least 2 or 3 soap operas in the following time. The Granger family and the Hood sisters enjoyed a pleasant lunch together. It had to be said that as the noble branch of the military, the Navy, the kind of upbringing they revealed from the inside out allowed them to quickly chat with the Granger family. Chapter 19: Ginger and Fish Cakes. After a pleasant lunch, Hugo and his family were happily preparing to say goodbye to Hood and her group. Just then, Hood took a large cardboard box from under the table and placed it on top. "By the way, do you know where any animal shelters are?" Hood asked while moving the box. "When I went out today, I found this box placed in front of my door, but we can't keep pets right now. I lived in Italy with my sister until 6 months ago, so I don't know anything about London." Just as the box was placed on the table, a white and ginger tabby cat and a black and white tuxedo cat pushed open the lid and poked their heads out. Then, tilting their heads, they looked at the Granger family in an adorable pose. "Oh, they're so cute." Hermione was immediately captivated by the two cats deliberately acting cute. She reached out to stroke their heads, and the two cats obediently leaned in and rubbed against her palm, appearing very endearing. "Aren't those Ginger and Fish Cake?" As the Admiral, Hugo immediately recognized the two cats in the box as Hood's ship equipment. He curiously asked Veneto in his mind, "Because Hood is a little worried about your safety at school, but she can't enter the school herself, she decided to let her chest, the two ship equipment cats, protect your safety, through the Admiral network?" Veneto's voice was noticeably displeased. Understandably, Hood's attitude was clearly a sign of distrust towards Veneto, so it's no wonder Veneto was angry when she first heard Hood's suggestion. However, after calming down a bit, Veneto also expressed that she could understand Hood's actions. After all, as Hood said, she herself would have difficulty providing comprehensive protection to the Admiral, especially while sleeping. So, she finally agreed to Hood sending the two cats as another layer of insurance for the Admiral. Although she understood the reasoning, Veneto couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. This was why Hugo could detect the displeasure in Veneto's tone clearly. Veneto's displeasure was just a way to sulk with Hugo, so Hugo just comforted her with a few words, and Veneto returned to her usual energetic self. Just then, Hermione took her hand off the cats' heads, turned to her mother, and asked, "Mom, Dad, these two cats are so cute. Can I keep them?" "Me too, I suddenly want to keep a cat too." As soon as Hermione finished speaking, Hugo quickly raised his hand to indicate that he also wanted to keep a cat. According to the idea that had just popped into his head, having a cat by his and Hermione's side could protect their safety as much as possible. "I think it should be okay." Mr. Granger thought for a moment and nodded. "However, you two need to take care of these cats yourselves, even when you're at school. Anyway, I saw your list, and it said that as first-year students, you can bring a cat as a pet to school. It would be great if you could adopt them," Hood said, gently pushing up her glasses. "They're very well behaved and seem much smarter than ordinary cats. If my home wasn't temporarily unable to keep cats, I would definitely adopt them." After speaking, Hood dragged out a large bag from under her feet and said, "When I saw these two cats in front of my door, I also found this bag next to them. The bag contains brand new cat supplies and 2 large bags of cat food. Besides that, there's a note in the box saying that the ginger cat is called Ginger, and the black and white cat is called Fish Cake." After saying a few more words, the Granger family waved goodbye to Hood and her group. The only difference from before they came for lunch was that the Granger family now had 2 very adorable cats in addition to the things they had just bought. As soon as they got in the car, Hugo and Hermione, sitting in the back seat, had a brief discussion and decided which cat each of them would keep. Perhaps it was fate, but Hermione was clearly interested in the chubby ginger cat, Ginger. And Hugo simply chose the remaining black and white cat, Fish Cake. Just as Hermione held Ginger and said, "I want this cat," Hugo suddenly felt his destiny points increase by 3 in one go. This was much more than the points Hermione had gained from getting a one that was different from the original story. "What are you doing now?" Just then, a slightly impatient voice that sounded like victories rang in Hugo's mind. "Why have your destiny points increased by 3 again? Did you meet another key character from the original novel and establish a connection with them again?" "Of course not." Hugo roughly guessed where his destiny points came from. He looked at Hermione, who was sitting next to him happily petting the cat, and said to Victory in his mind, "That's because my sister Hermione just chose her pet, and Hood and the others sent it over. I understand." As an existence similar to System Spirit, Victory naturally knew the story of Harry Potter. After thinking carefully, she understood the matter. Crookshanks has been replaced by Ginger, and Crookshanks was considered a semi-main character in the original third-year story, so that's why this time, just a simple pet replacement caused the destiny points to increase so much. This is still because it's not third year yet, and many things haven't happened, so it's impossible to give the corresponding destiny points, Victory concluded. So, you really had good luck today. This was just a shopping trip not recorded in the original text, and it earned you 4 destiny points. However, this situation cannot be replicated at all, Hugo said to Victory, gently scratching Fishcake's chin in his arms. After all, as long as there are no accidents, a person will only buy one wand in their lifetime, and as for pets, I don't think my sister is the type to change pets often. In conclusion, although I gain 4 destiny points in one go this time, it's all a one-time deal. What do you plan to do with these 4 destiny points? Victory asked. Are you going to summon a few more ship girl partners? Of course, Hugo said without hesitation. After all, the only avatar ability he could currently exchange for with destiny points was that short-haired girl, but he didn't want to practice how to become a woman for the time being. Moreover, for him now, transforming into a young woman would definitely not bring as many benefits as summoning 1 or 2 more ship girls that night after returning home. After confirming that everyone was asleep, Hugo used the same trick again, transforming into the black officer representing the unluckiest of the unlucky, and went to the Imperial War Museum to summon the 2 ship girls he had been eyeing. One of the ship girls was the glowworm, summoned through the Victoria Cross of Major Gerard B. Roop in the museum exhibit hall. As his initial ship in the game in his previous life, Hugo summoned her in the second round after ensuring his safety. In addition to using 1 destiny point to summon glowworm, Hugo used the other 3 destiny points to summon Belfast, wearing a traditional Scottish-style military uniform, on the ship on the Thames River. After all, both the newly summoned glowworm and the previously summoned Veneto would be going to Hogwarts with him, so Hugo felt a little uneasy about Hood being alone in London. Therefore, he chose the light cruiser Belfast, who was good at escorting, as Hood's assistant in his summons. Chapter 20 Experimental Magic. Wingardium Leviosa. The next morning, Hugo hastily finished breakfast and began studying magic. After all, as Muggle students, this was their only chance to use magic outside of school hours, and Hugo certainly couldn't pass it up. He chose the levitation charm as his practice spell because it didn't seem very dangerous, and according to the original story, it was the first spell the young wizards learned after entering Hogwarts. Operationally, it should be relatively simple. Unfortunately, from the time he got the wand yesterday afternoon until now, Hugo hasn't been able to make the feather plucked from the feather duster fly up along the wand like in the movie. This time was no exception. The feather just lazily flipped over on the table and then stayed there motionless. This is simply, frustrated by more than an hour of failure, Hugo simply stood up from the table and went to Hermione's room next door to see how she was doing with her spell learning. As a result, when he pushed the door open, he unsurprisingly saw the feather on Hermione's desk also just bounce once and fall back onto the table. This scene confirmed something for Hugo. Hermione was indeed smart, but not to the point of being a genius in learning magic. The reason she studied well was purely because she was willing to work hard and diligently, just like Hermione casually said to Harry and Ron when they first met on the train. "I've tried a few simple spells at home, just for practice, and they all worked." When Hugo saw this in his previous life, he thought Hermione was the kind of genius who could use a spell after reading it once. But now he thinks that this actually involved countless hours of hard practice behind the scenes. Otherwise, Hermione wouldn't have told Ron on the charms class that the gar sound in the spell should be long and clear. After all, the textbook only has the spell and the wand movement, and there is only a relatively vague description of the pronunciation and intonation. Therefore, to find the right way to pronounce the spell for oneself requires repeated attempts. The act of chanting a spell is actually to communicate with a magic in the wizard's body to release magic, so when wizards are able to skillfully mobilize the magic in their body, using magic without chanting a spell becomes possible. Therefore, the core function of the spell is communication, not the accuracy of the chanting. For example, Voldemort should be considered one of the wizards in this world who is most proficient in the killing curse. But since he used magic to get a nose job, his pronunciation often has a heavy nasal sound, So when chanting the spell, it is definitely different from the standard pronunciation, but this does not weaken the power of the killing curse in Voldemort's hands. From this point, we can know that the pronunciation of the spell is important for the release of magic, but it is not to a certain decisive degree, and may even vary from person to person. In other words, the textbook's explanation of the spell can only explain up to the point that the gar sound in the levitation charm should be lengthened. And to find the pronunciation that suits you best requires the wizard learning the spell to master it bit by bit through repeated practice, and there is no shortcut. The only thing to be thankful for is that learning magic is like learning to swim or ride a bicycle. It belongs more to a basic physical memory than a memory in the brain. So once you learn it, it is difficult to forget. You don't have to worry about all your previous efforts being wasted because you haven't used a certain spell for 3 days after spending a lot of effort to learn it. In the following time, Hugo and Hermione stayed in her room to study magic. Through the mutual discussion and learning during the two people's study, the progress of learning suddenly accelerated a lot. By the time they had lunch, they were already able to make the feather float in the air for 2 or 3 seconds under the command of their wand. Since the Grangers were busy with work today, Hugo and his sister had to cook lunch themselves. After eating traditional spaghetti and feeding the cat, Hermione wanted to recite the textbook, so Hugo, who had different ideas, returned to his room alone and began to study alone. At this time, through the Admiral network, Hugo learned that Firefly had received a letter from Hogwarts last night, and then went to Diagon Alley with Veneto and Hood this morning to purchase all the necessary things. Just as he contacted Veneto and them, Hood and Firefly had just returned from Diagon Alley to their residence in Whitechapel. Listening to Firefly chattering about her trip to Diagon Alley today in the Admiral network, a smile slowly appeared on Hugo's face. Now the ship girls finally have a wand each. Moreover, the wands chosen by the ship girls have a characteristic, that is, they are quite distinctive in the choice of wand wood. For example, the wand wood used by Hood, Veneto, and Belfast are all teak. This is also the wood used for the deck on warships. And destroyers like Firefly don't have wooden decks, so they chose lignum vitae, which is the same as the warship's propeller shaft sleeve. Actually, I already have a wand, Firefly murmured softly, but Sisterhood said that it would be strange if you didn't buy a wand when everyone else is buying wands, so I bought another one. But I still prefer my own wand. Then you can use your own after you enter school, Hugo comforted the somewhat sulky Firefly. Anyway, the professors at the school won't care which wand you use. That's a good idea. Firefly's voice suddenly became happy. I'll just stuff the wand I just bought at the bottom of my suitcase, and I'll use my own wand at school, soon. Veneto and the others, who had finished organizing the things they bought, also joined the Admiral network and started chatting. While chatting, Hugo talked about the problems he encountered when learning the levitation charm just now. Why didn't you say it earlier, Commander? Veneto said immediately after Hugo finished talking about his problem. Actually, we can study together through the Admiral network? Isn't the Admiral network used to connect you on a soul level? Hugo asked curiously. Because Victory's introduction to him before was very general, so his application of the Admiral network is currently limited to contacting the ship girls. Maybe I was too general at the time. Victory's apologetic voice echoed in Hugo's mind through the Admiral network. This soul connection is far more useful than you imagine. Under Victory's guidance, Hugo gradually mastered another function of the Admiral network. As an admiral, he could use this network built in the soul to share the thinking ability of all the ship girls who entered this network. At the same time, let everyone connected to the network share the results after research and learning. In other words, when Hugo connects to the soul, it is equivalent to him doing something at the same time with the thinking ability of the ship girls connected to the Admiral network. After understanding this usage, he immediately invested this ability in learning, and found that he could master these unfamiliar magics with an unprecedented efficiency. Maybe I can finish all the first-year courses before school starts. After successfully commanding a book on the table to fly around according to the position pointed by his wand, Hugo thought happily. Chapter 21-9, 3/4 Station. Unfortunately, after further study, Hugo realized that his previous ideas were a bit too idealistic. Although his body would be strengthened each time he summoned a ship girl, and exchanging portraits would further enhance his entire being, this strengthening was insignificant compared to the many ship girl souls connected to the Admiral network. Therefore, before Hugo could use fate points to exchange for powerful portraits and completely improve his level, he couldn't spend more than an hour a day in this soul connection state learning. If he exceeded an hour, Hugo, whose soul was insufficient, would immediately enter a downgraded communication network state within the Admiral network. In this situation, Hugo could only communicate with the ship girls through text and nothing else. This state could only be by sleeping well for at least 4 hours. However, for Hugo, although this learning method had many limitations, the benefits it brought were absolutely powerful. At least he could feel an unprecedented clarity in his brain in this soul-connected state, allowing him to learn magic with very high efficiency. So, in the time before school started, Hugo mastered more than 60 spells from the first-year textbooks, averaging 1 spell a day. At the same time, all the ship girls connected to this network also mastered these spells. All of this was achieved entirely through the cheat-like ability of the Admiral network. It seems I can pretend to be a genius. After entering school, Hugo was quite satisfied with his learning results during the vacation. However, he was a bit unhappy that the so-called skill exchange for ship girls was limited to wizard currency. Currently, his 6 galleons and 12 sickles weren't even enough to exchange for 1 skill, because the cheapest skill required 10 galleons. After a vacation of frantic learning, September 1st, the day to go to school, finally arrived. That morning, after finishing breakfast, the Granger couple threw the luggage they had packed earlier into the trunk of their RV, and then drove towards central London. Because they left early, they weren't unlucky enough to encounter the common traffic jams in London. Therefore, at 10 a.m., the family of 4 arrived smoothly at King's Cross Station. You must take care of yourselves after you get to school, especially the 2 of you. Try to take care of each other. After entering the station hall, Mrs. Granger nagged to Hugo and Hermione, as for your learning ability, I don't need to worry too much, Mom. Don't worry, we can definitely take care of ourselves, Hugo said somewhat helplessly, and Hermione nodded vigorously beside him. They both knew that their mother meant well, but the problem was that Mrs. Granger had been nagging since breakfast today, making both of them feel like they couldn't take it anymore. Professor McGonagall wasn't someone as careless as Hagrid, so when she gave the tickets to Hugo and Hermione, she told the Granger family the location of platform 9, 3/4. Therefore, Hugo and Hermione didn't spend too much effort searching for this platform. To be able to set up a platform in this place is truly amazing. When they arrived at platform 9, 3/4, Mr. Granger touched the wall that separated the magical world from the ordinary world. He knew that the platform was inside, and wizards could pass through this wall. But in his perception, this was just an ordinary wall, perhaps because they arrived relatively early. Hugo and Hermione didn't encounter any wizards sending their children to school. Mr. Granger therefore studied the wall carefully for a while, and when he felt that he had studied it enough, he returned to Hugo and Hermione and said to them, Okay, you go ahead, remember to write us a letter every week after you get to school. Don't worry, we will write, Hugo and Hermione said in unison, and then waved goodbye to their parents before pushing their trolleys towards the wall. As the trolley approached the wall, Hugo subconsciously closed his eyes. Even though he knew there was no danger at all, he couldn't help but feel a little instinctively scared when he saw a red brick wall rapidly approaching, as if it would hit his face in a second or two. Because everything was operating normally on platform 9 3/4 today, Hugo successfully passed through the wall separating the magical world from the ordinary world. After opening his eyes, a scarlet steam engine was parked beside a platform crowded with passengers. The sign on the train read, Hogwarts Express, 11 o'clock. Hugo stopped and looked back, finding that the wall he had just passed through had now become a wrought iron archway, with a sign above it that read, Platform 9 3/4. How amazing, Hermione beside him exclaimed. Because only a wall separated 2 seemingly completely different worlds. The place they came from was a standard modern train station from the late 20th century, but what appeared in front of them now was an old train station full of Victorian style. The thick smoke from the steam engine swirled above the chattering crowd, and cats of various colors darted back and forth under people's feet. Amidst the buzzing voices of the crowd and the noisy sounds of dragging heavy luggage, owls hooted shrilly, echoing each other. Why don't they renovate these places? Hermione looked at the platform, which was much darker than the outside, and turned to Hugo and said, It feels too old here. Maybe wizards are more accustomed to some classical styles of decoration. Hugo shrugged and said, Think about the wizarding shopping street we saw before and the wizard robes we bought, which look like the style of Shakespeare's era. So I think this kind of train station style is probably relatively trendy for wizards. It's also possible that wizards never update things when they use ordinary people's stuff, but choose to keep them the way they were when they got them, Hermione said, because I saw a spell in the textbook that can be used to repair various items, so those things are basically unbreakable for wizards. While complaining about the wizards' conservatism, Hugo and Hermione pushed their carts towards the red train. Because they arrived relatively early, they didn't encounter the Weasley family or Neville and his grandmother. Unfortunately, these shouldn't be important in the original plot, so Hugo didn't get any fate points. The first few carriages weren't very crowded yet, and the first prefect's carriage was completely empty. Some of the students in the carriages leaned out of the windows to talk to their families, while others were playing around in their seats. On the platform stood a group of wizarding parents seeing off their children because his body had been strengthened by the famous non-chief portrait, possessing the physique equivalent to a trained ordinary adult. Hugo easily carried the two people's luggage from the platform to the carriage, and then was very lucky to find an empty compartment near the front of the train to settle down. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 22 On the Train. Just a few minutes after Hugo and Hermione sat down, they each took out a book from their luggage and started reading. Of course, they weren't reading textbooks at this time, but rather something like a travelogue they had bought at Flourish and Blotch to be precise. It was a series of booklets providing a simple and comprehensive introduction to the wizarding world of various European countries. It recorded the exclusive locations for wizards in each country and the specialties of the magical world in each country. It was more of a travel guide than a popular science booklet. After all, compared to ordinary people, they had Flu Network and Apparition Magic, making international travel much easier. It's really noisy outside. After flipping through a dozen pages, Hermione looked around the compartment with some helplessness. After all, this train was an old model, and the carriages were all made of thin wooden boards, so the soundproofing wasn't very good. And after the wizards got this train, they focused the magical modifications on other places and didn't pay attention to the soundproofing issue. So, after they sat down, all kinds of noises kept echoing around them, such as the sounds of students getting on the train and saying goodbye to their parents, the sounds of running and playing in the carriages, or the sounds of moving luggage. Although these sounds weren't loud, it always felt like there was a buzzing in your ears when trying to read. More importantly, the door of their compartment was half open. After all, this small compartment wasn't full, and according to the etiquette of riding the train, closing the door now would be very impolite. It is indeed a bit noisy, Hugo said, putting down his book. In fact, although the surrounding sounds were noisy, they weren't so noisy that he couldn't read. The reason Hermione put down her book and complained was probably just because she was nervous. After all, this was the first time in their 11 years that they had left home for a long time, and they were going to a place they had never been to before, or even heard of. It was very normal to be nervous in this situation, so Hugo also put down his book, then took out a small bag of shortbread cookies from his luggage and handed it over. I think we can eat some cookies now and read after the train starts. Sure enough, sweets can soothe nerves in many cases. After eating 2 or 3 small cookies with a lot of condensed milk and sugar, Hermione seemed much calmer. Just as the two of them were eating cookies and guessing what the magic school would be like, the door of the half-open small compartment was knocked on. So you were here. I've been looking for you since I got on the train. Luckily, I only had to go through one carriage to find you. After the knock stopped, the person outside opened the door, and a girl with silver-white short hair walked in, followed by a blonde, blue-eyed girl with pigtails. Can we sit here? Of course, no problem. Miss Veneto, meeting an acquaintance on this train, which was almost full of strangers, was a very happy thing for Hermione, so she very enthusiastically invited Veneto and the girl behind her into the room, and then helped them put their luggage on the shelf together with Hugo. May I ask who this young lady is? After everyone was seated, Hermione asked Veneto, because she saw that this girl and Veneto seemed to be very familiar, not like they had just met. Oh, she's a distant cousin of mine, and she's always been with my sisterhood before, Veneto introduced simply. Her name is Firefly, Firefly Roop. Obviously, Firefly used her ship's name as her own name, and then used the surname of that brave captain as her own surname. But the name formed in this way didn't seem strange at all. After all, the scope of naming in England is much larger than the scope of naming in Hugo's previous life's homeland, and all kinds of things can be used as their own names. For example, Sirius Black used a constellation as his name. Therefore, using Firefly as a name is also common, and didn't make Hermione feel anything was wrong, perhaps because they had met before and left a good impression on each other. The 4 people in the carriage quickly started chatting. Even the fact that the train started and departed from King's Cross Station didn't interrupt their chat. Actually, I also received a letter from Buttons before, probably because I've been in Italy all this time. After the train left the city of London, patches of green fields began to appear on both sides of the railway. At this time, Veneto began to talk about the interesting things she had encountered before in the carriage. But at that time, I had already agreed to come to Hogwarts, so I could only send them a letter to express my apologies. Buttons seems to be a magic school located in France, and it is also one of the 3 strongest schools in Europe, Hermione said, recalling the books she had read before, and the other 2 are Hogwarts, where we are going now, and Durmstrang, which should be located in Northern Europe or Germany. However, according to the introduction in the book I bought before, Hogwarts should be the oldest and best of these 3 schools. Hermione shrugged her shoulders at this point. But considering that these books are all published in England, their impartiality is rather suspicious. Soon everyone shifted from discussing European magic education to focusing on Hogwarts School itself, and then naturally discussed the issue of sorting. Many of the books I've read say that Gryffindor is the best house in Hogwarts, because the greatest white wizard of this century, Professor Dumbledore, graduated from this house. But I feel that the characteristics of this house don't completely match my personality. Hermione had read a lot of books on the sorting issue, and had discussed it with Hugo several times at home before. So she probably had her own judgment. But even so, Gryffindor still has enough attraction for me. But on the other hand, I think Ravenclaw is also good. But the problem is, we don't know how the school sorts. It was Firefly who spoke at this time. As an outgoing ship girl, she quickly became familiar with Hermione even though she had just met her. I've read several books at home, but they all only say that sorting is done through a ceremony, but they don't say the specific content of this ceremony. As a ship girl, Firefly knew through Hugo's Admiral network that the sorting relied on the sorting hat, but theoretically she shouldn't know this, so at this time she only told Hermione the definition in the book. So, except for Slytherin, we may be sorted into any of the remaining 3 houses. Hermione shrugged and said, after all, we don't have the so-called wizarding bloodline. After discussing the sorting issue for a while, the 4 people in the compartment began to discuss the issue of homework. Hermione seemed a little worried that she wouldn't be able to compete with the students from wizarding families in academics, but Veneto said that according to the books she had read before, wizards believed that learning magic too early was not conducive to the children's physical and magical development, so there was no need to worry too much about this. As they talked, the train sped quickly along the tracks, flying along fields full of cattle and sheep. Chapter 2302-3 Hogwarts Express. Around 12:30 p.m., a loud, clattering noise echoed down the corridor. A woman with a cheerful smile and dimples pushed open the compartment door and asked, "My dears, would anyone like to buy any snacks from the trolley?" Although everyone present had eaten a hearty breakfast, they were feeling a bit peckish after chatting for so long. Moreover, everyone was quite interested in trying snacks from the magical world, so they each took out 5 sickles and bought a little of everything. "The taste is alright, but it might be a bit intense for you," Firefly commented after tearing open a package of Bertie Bott's Every Flavor beans and eating one. True to its name, Bertie Bott's Every Flavor beans offered a unique flavor with every bite. For example, the one Firefly had just eaten tasted like engine oil in most cases. Shipgirl's sense of taste isn't much different from humans, except for some slight variations in certain situations, such as when dealing with military necessities. The book says this stuff comes in 700 flavors, and they change some of them every few years, Veneto said, biting into a bean. "Ah, the taste of Italian cheese, the taste of home." As everyone began to taste and comment on these snacks they had never seen before, the fields rushing past a train window became even more desolate than before. A neat expanse of farmland had vanished, replaced by a forest, winding rivers, and dark green hills. Just then, there was a knock on the compartment door. A round-faced boy stood outside, his eyes filled with tears. "Excuse me," he said, "I was wondering, have you seen my toad?" "I'm sorry, there shouldn't be a toad in this compartment," Hugo said with certainty, because after entering the compartment, the shipgirls had subconsciously checked it thoroughly. It was hard to say about some tiny creatures, but there was absolutely no way that Neville's toad, which was about the size of a bullfrog, could have escaped their search. "But if we see it, we'll try to let you know." "Thank you." The boy sniffled and walked toward the back of the train, muttering to himself, "How many times has this happened? Trevor always tries to run away from me." It seemed this must be Neville Longbottom, the one who almost became the protagonist. Only this time, because Hermione was engrossed in chatting with her two new friends, she didn't offer to help him search as she did in the original story, but instead left the whole thing to Hugo to handle. Gained 0.5 destiny points, Victory's voice echoed in Hugo's mind. As the system's spirit-like existence that could appear beside every ship girl and admiral at any time through the Admiral network connection, she was still able to sense Hugo's changes even though she was currently with Hood. Why only this much? Looking at the destiny points he had gained, Hugo felt something was off. If I remember correctly, the encounter on the train in the original story laid the foundation for the core trio of the entire series. How could it only give me so few destiny points now? I think, just like you said, this encounter laid the foundation for the future trio of the entire book, Victory said, emphasizing the word future, but the future is just the future, it's something that hasn't happened yet. I believe this kind of destiny point calculation only counts the direct changes you make to what is happening now, and not the indirect changes caused by a series of butterfly effects resulting from the changes you cause. For example, the reason your sister raising Ginger now can bring you so many deviation points is likely because the Ginger replaced a certain supporting character, plus the fact that your sister started raising a pet in her first year. It doesn't calculate the potential future changes caused by the cat being replaced in the original story. Okay, so that means I got 0.5 destiny points for changing a small gathering in the original story. After some explanation, Hugo finally understood how the system worked apart from this little interlude. The rest of the journey was spent chatting. It wasn't until the sky darkened and the lights in the train came on that they stopped, their throats a little dry from talking so much. We should put on our robes now, Hugo said, glancing at the sky outside. The sky had turned a deep purple, and rolling hills and forests appeared on both sides of the railway. At the same time, the train seemed to be slowing down, probably because it was almost at the school. Changing clothes was naturally ladies first, especially when there were 3 ladies. So Hugo could only wait for the 3 ladies to finish changing before he could change himself. As a result, by the time he finished changing, he heard the train's announcement: the train will arrive at Hogwarts in 5 minutes. Please leave your luggage on the train, and we will have it delivered to the school. It's so great not having to carry our own luggage, Hermione said, sitting back in the compartment. After all, the luggage, which was bigger than her, had caused her a lot of trouble along the way. I just wonder what the school staff at the magic school are like? Will they use magic to carry the luggage? As Hermione pondered a series of things about the magic school, the train slowed down noticeably and finally stopped at the end of the tracks. Passengers pushed and shoved, all crowding toward the door, stepping down onto a dark, small platform. Although the train was named the Hogwarts Express, it took nearly 9 hours to travel from London to Scotland, averaging about 90 kilometers per hour. For the slow-moving trains in England, calling it an express wasn't an exaggeration, but for Hugo, who often took high-speed trains in his previous life, it seemed a bit too slow. It's still a bit chilly in the Scottish Highlands. Hermione shivered after getting off the train, then subconsciously moved closer to Hugo. I hope we can get inside the school building soon to warm up, Loomis, Hugo said. Because it was too dark around them, Hugo took out his wand and lit up the surrounding area, making it much easier to walk. At the same time, a middle-aged man's voice echoed across the small platform. First years. First years over here. Harry, over here, are you alright? It seems that Harry Potter, the boy who lived, should be in the same year as us this year, Hermione whispered to Hugo after hearing Hagrid's call. When we get to the school, I have to see what makes him so different from ordinary people. Hugo smiled slightly at his sister's words. That competitive spirit was definitely Hermione. Come on, follow me. Are there any more first years? Watch your step, everyone. Alright. First years, follow me. After calling out one last time, Hugo and the other first years followed Hagrid in another direction, parting ways with the other 6 years of students and walking into a dark path. Chapter 24 Hogwarts Castle. The path was not only narrow but also steep. Even though Hugo used the Loomis spell to illuminate the road ahead, it only made it slightly easier to walk. Many places were still slippery and bumpy. Veneto and Firefly, on the other hand, seemed to have better balance due to their years at sea, so they walked much more steadily than the others. Besides Hugo, Veneto and Firefly also lit their wands. This inspired other young wizards, and many who had studied the textbooks beforehand also lit their own wands. Although there was magical lighting, it barely illuminated the small area under their feet. The sides of the road were still towering shadows, which were likely dense forests. Because of the rough road, almost no one spoke along the way, and only an occasional sob could be heard from someone. "Turn this corner, and you'll see Hogwarts for the first time," Hagrid called back. Then there was a loud "ooh." At the end of the narrow path, a black lake suddenly opened up. On the high hillside across the lake stood a majestic castle with towering spires and windows that twinkled in the starlight. Hugo also exclaimed like a country bumpkin. Although he had seen this scene in movies more than once in his previous life, when Hogwarts Castle really appeared in front of him, Hugo could still feel his extreme excitement. "No more than 4 people per boat," Hagrid shouted, pointing to a fleet of small boats moored on the shore. Hugo and his 3 companions got into a boat together. After they were seated, Hagrid's voice once again reached everyone's ears. "Everyone on board? Good. Forward, march." A fleet of small boats immediately sailed across the mirror-like lake, without oars or sails. However, at this time, the new students in the boat did not pay attention to this, but silently stared at the huge castle that rose into the clouds. Hugo was no exception, but while looking at the castle that was getting bigger and bigger in his sight, he was still thinking about the rule that Hagrid had just said, that a boat could not carry more than 4 people. The rule that a boat cannot carry more than 4 people is not difficult to understand. After all, the rugged path that the new students take, plus crossing the Black Lake, are all, in a sense, to pay tribute to the 4 founders who built the school. So it is normal to limit the number of people that can sit on a boat. However, Hugo was a little curious about how these boats determined the number of people sitting on them. According to his observation, these boats could easily accommodate 5 or 6 young or first-year students at a time. So it certainly wasn't based on weight. I think it should be based on the total magic power of the people sitting on the boat to determine the number of people on the boat. Vinetto's voice sounded in Hugo's mind. After all, wizards generally like to rely on magic to calculate many things to show their specialness. And have you noticed that these boats are very similar to another boat? You're talking about a boat Voldemort used to hide the locket. Hugo had felt a sense of familiarity after seeing these boats, but it wasn't entirely the feeling of the movie scene from his previous life coming true. Now, after Vinetto's reminder, Hugo immediately understood. "That's right," Vinetto said somewhat proudly. "Don't you think the boats in these 2 places are very similar?" And according to the original author's description and many sources, Voldemort has always had a special feeling for Hogwarts. So he was deeply impressed by these boats that brought him into the school, and even subconsciously imitated these boats when hiding his Horcrux. This is just a guess, and it's not necessarily true. Although Hugo said this, he also subconsciously believed in his heart that this should be the case. "Everyone, duck down." At this time, Hagrid's voice came from the front, interrupting Hugo's thoughts. Hugo subconsciously lowered his head, only to find that the secret entrance opened in the cliff covered with ivy curtains was actually quite large. Among so many people in the boat, only Hagrid himself needed to lower his HUD. Following this tunnel, everyone arrived at a place similar to an underground dock, and then climbed onto a ground of gravel and pebbles. After waiting for a few minutes, everyone, illuminated by Hagrid's lantern, climbed up a tunnel in the rocks to reach a flat, damp meadow under the shadow of the castle. Then they climbed up stone steps to a huge oak door. "Everyone here?" After finally confirming that everyone had arrived, Hagrid raised a huge fist and knocked on the castle gate 3 times. The gate immediately opened to the left and right, and a tall, black-haired witch in emerald green robes stood in front of the gate. This was Professor McGonagall, who had previously visited the Granger family. This was a very serious-looking professor, so after she appeared, it was as if a cold wind swept through the entire hall. The chattering first-year students suddenly closed their mouths, and even lowered their breathing. "First-year students, Professor McGonagall," Hagrid said. "Thank you, Hagrid. Leave them to me here." Professor McGonagall nodded in response. Then she watched the big man pass by her and walk towards the hall. Hagrid seemed to be walking in a hurry, because for normal people, a very serious colleague often gives people a sense of oppression. Not to mention that he had used magic illegally several times during the holidays, and the act of conjuring a pig's tail on Dudley's butt clearly violated the law. So, feeling guilty, he quickly ran to the hall after a simple handover when he saw Professor McGonagall. However, McGonagall probably didn't know these things, so she still pulled the door wide open as in previous years, revealing the hall behind the door. This hall, which should be the entrance hall, was not small, and the ceiling was so high that it was almost impossible to see the top. Hugo felt that this entrance hall alone could fit his 2-story house. In addition to being large, This entrance hall also revealed a low-key luxury. Both sides of the entrance hall were stone walls, with burning torches hanging on them. The front was a luxurious marble staircase leading upstairs. The first-year students followed Professor McGonagall along the stone-paved floor. Hugo could hear the buzzing voices of at least several hundred people coming from inside the door on the right, but Professor McGonagall did not push open that door, but led them to a small, empty room at the other end of the hall. Everyone crowded in, rubbing shoulders and backs, nervously gazing at everything around them. "Welcome to Hogwarts," Professor McGonagall said. "The start of term feast is about to begin, but before you go to the dining hall to take your seats, you must first determine which house you will each enter. Sorting is a very important ceremony, because during your time at school, the house will be like your home at Hogwarts. You will take classes with other students in the house, live in the house's dormitories, and spend your free time in the house's common room. The names of the 4 houses are Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. Each house has its own glorious history and has cultivated outstanding witches and wizards. During your time at Hogwarts, your outstanding performance will earn your house points, while any violations will deduct points from your house. At the end of the year, the house with the highest score will win the House Cup, which is a great honor. I hope that no matter which house you are sorted into, you will bring glory to the house." In a few minutes, the sorting ceremony will be held in front of the entire school. "I suggest that you tidy yourselves up and look more energetic while you wait," Professor McGonagall said here and glanced at the first-year students, finally urging, "I will come and get you when they are ready. Please be quiet while you wait." After speaking, Professor McGonagall turned and left the room. Chapter 25 The Sorting Hat. No sooner had Professor McGonagall left the room than the first-year students started whispering to each other again. Of course, at this moment, everyone was most concerned about the sorting ceremony that would happen later. So, almost all the conversations Hugo heard were about how the sorting ceremony would work. Apart from the little wizards asking their classmates, most of the little wizards were either silent or muttering something to themselves. Perhaps because the atmosphere had become dull, even those few students who had been asking about how the school did the sorting ceremony had fallen silent. Hugo heard Hermione beside him constantly muttering something, as if she was reciting the texts and spells she had memorized before. Seeing his sister so nervous, he instinctively reached out and held Hermione's somewhat cold hand. This was a way for the two siblings to comfort each other when they were nervous. It was quite effective. Although Hermione didn't stop reciting the contents of the textbooks, at least she wasn't trembling slightly with excitement anymore. "Oh my goodness!" Several exclamations suddenly came from the first-year students. Hugo was drawn by the exclamations and looked up, only to find 20 or so ghosts suddenly darting out from the wall behind them. These pearly white, translucent ghosts glided across the entire room, talking amongst themselves. The ghosts paid little attention to the first-year students below, seemingly arguing about something. A chubby ghost resembling a little monk said, "We should forgive, we should forget. I say, we should give him another chance. My good monk, haven't we given Peeves enough chances? But he's given us all nasty nicknames. You know, he doesn't even qualify as a proper ghost. I say, what are you doing here?" A ghost wearing a ruff suddenly noticed the first-year students. No one answered, including Hugo. After all, seeing a ghost on a computer screen and actually encountering a ghost in real life gave people completely different feelings, so Hugo was also in shock. "New students," the chubby monk said to them with a smile. "I imagine you're about to be tested, perhaps because this monk ghost looked very kind." Several of the bolder new students nodded silently. And after seeing that his question had been answered, this chubby monk ghost seemed quite excited. "I hope you're sorted into Hufflepuff. I used to be in that house." At this moment, Professor McGonagall returned, and the ghosts filed through the opposite wall and disappeared. "Now, form a single line," Professor McGonagall said to the first-year students, "and follow me." Everyone silently followed Professor McGonagall out of the room, through the entrance hall, and through a pair of double doors at the back into a magnificent dining hall. The students of the remaining 6 years were already sitting around 4 long tables, arranged by house. Thousands of candles floating in the air above the tables illuminated the entire dining hall. "That candle must have been enchanted," Veneto whispered to Hugo, leaning closer. "If it were the ordinary candles we used before, even doubling the number of candles above wouldn't be enough to light this place up so much." Hugo admitted that Veneto was right. At least, ordinary candles would definitely drip wax. So, on that basis, Making the candles a little brighter shouldn't be too difficult for wizards. Gleaming golden plates and goblets were set on the 4 tables. At the head of the hall, another long table was set up, which was for the teachers' seats. Hugo recognized Headmaster Dumbledore at first glance, because his silvery white beard looked so dazzling that it was difficult for anyone entering the hall to ignore it. Next, he gradually recognized the other professors. After all, Hogwarts professors all had quite distinctive appearances, making it difficult to confuse them. Professor McGonagall led the first-year students over there, having them line up facing the entire upper-year students, with the teachers behind them. The candlelight flickered, and hundreds of faces watching them were like pale lanterns. The ghosts were also mixed in among the students, flashing with a hazy silver light. Then, she gently placed a 4-legged stool in front of the first-year students, and then took out a pointed wizard's hat from who knows where and placed it on the 4-legged stool. This hat was patched up, very old, and extremely dirty. Hugo had always suspected that in the more than 1,000 years since this hat was made, it probably hadn't been cleaned at all. But theoretically, it shouldn't be too difficult for wizards to cast a spell to clean it, so Hugo suspected that this may be because, as a magical artifact that had experienced more than 1,000 years, even the hat that had been enchanted by the 4 founders was now incredibly fragile due to the long passage of time, and could not even withstand any magic or purely manual cleaning methods. Unlike the habit of Hugo's homeland in his previous life of restoring cultural relics to their original state, Europe and the United States are more accustomed to restoring cultural relics to look like new. For example, for bronzes, Chinese archaeologists generally leave the rust and patina on the top that does not affect the strength of the utensils during restoration, but Western archaeologists will clean the surface of the utensils completely. So, under normal circumstances, as such an important magical tool that is even representative in the entire British magical world, neither Hogwarts nor other institutions in the UK would allow the sorting hat to be so tattered. Unless they really couldn't clean and repair it. Just as Hugo was thinking about this question, the hat trembled slightly at first, and then the frequency of the shaking became greater and greater. At the same time, a wide crack opened at the edge of the hat, like a mouth, and then it began to sing in a very strange tone. "You may not think I'm pretty, but don't judge on what you see. Ne'll eat myself if you can find na smarter hat than me. You can keep your bowlers black, knit or top hats sleek and tall, for I'm the sorting hat and I can cap them all. There's nothing hidden in your head the sorting hat can't see. So try me on and I will tell you where you ought to be. You might belong in Gryffindor, weird well the brave at heart, they're daring, nerve, and chivalry set Gryffindors apart. You might belong in Hufflepuff, where they are just and loyal, those patient Hufflepuffs are true and unafraid of toil. Or yet in wise old Ravenclaw, if you've already mind, we're those of wit and learning, will always find their kind. Or perhaps in Slytherin I'll make your real friends, those cunning folk use any means to achieve their ends. So put me on. Don't be afraid, now don't get in a flap, I'll in safe hands, though I have none, for I'm a thinking cap." After the song ended, there was thunderous applause, but Hugo thought that this was probably because the hat's song was really too unpleasant to listen to, so everyone seemed so happy when it stopped singing. The sorting hat bowed to the 4 tables one by one, and then became still. Professor McGonagall then walked forward a few steps, holding a roll of parchment in her hand. "When I call your name, you will put on the hat, sit on the stool, and wait for the sorting. The most important sorting ceremony of the start of the school year is about to begin." End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.